Lightning split the Nebraska sky as Clara Whitmore ran for her life, soaked, hunted, and out of choices. Behind her, a stepfather who'd murdered her mother and planned to sell her into marriage. Ahead, only darkness and the slim hope of survival. This is a story about a woman who refused to be owned, a quiet hero who gave without taking, and the moment justice found its voice in the frontier. Stay with me until the end, and if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's fight for freedom can travel. The rain came down like punishment. Clara Whitmore stumbled through the tall grass, her boots sinking into mud with every desperate step. Water streamed down her face, plastering dark strands of hair against her skin. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one burning in her chest. Behind her, too close, always too close, she could hear them. The rhythmic thunder of hooves, the shouts of men who thought they owned her future. She had run out of prayers miles ago. Now there was only the running itself. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. Rolling waves of grass turned silver black under storm clouds. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the landscape in violent bursts. For one blinding second, Clara saw cottonwood trees clustered in the distance, and beneath them, the dark outline of a cabin. Hope surged through her exhaustion. She changed direction, angling toward those trees, her legs screaming in protest. The grass whipped at her skirts, tangling around her ankles. She hitched the sodden fabric higher, no longer caring about propriety or appearance. Survival was the only thing that mattered. "There!" a voice shouted behind her. "I see her!" Terror spiked fresh adrenaline through Clara's veins. She pushed harder, faster, even as her vision began to blur at the edges. The cabin was close now, maybe 200 yards. She could see lamplight in one window, warm and impossibly distant. Thunder rolled across the plains like cannon fire. Clara's foot caught on something, a root, a stone, her own exhaustion, and she went down hard. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Mud filled her mouth. For one terrible moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but lie there while the storm raged overhead and the horsemen closed in. "Get up!" The voice in her head sounded like her mother's. "Get up, Clara. Don't let him win." She pushed herself to her hands and knees, spitting mud, gasping for air. Her palms stung where they'd scraped against stones. Her whole body trembled with exhaustion and cold and fear so profound it felt like drowning. But she got up. The cabin was so close now. 100 yards, 75. She could see details. A porch with an overhang, a hitching post, a door that represented everything she was running toward. Choice, freedom, the possibility of a future that belonged to her. 50 yards. The horsemen were closing fast. She could hear individual voices now, could make out Edgar Crowley's commanding tone even over the storm. "Cut her off at the trees." 25 yards, Clara's legs were giving out. Her vision tunneled. The lamplight in the window became the only thing in the world, a small golden square of hope in an ocean of darkness. 10 yards. She hit the porch steps and nearly collapsed. Her hands found the railing and she hauled herself up. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. The covered porch offered sudden shelter from the rain. For one dizzying moment, Clara stood there, dripping and shaking, staring at the weathered wooden door. Behind her, the horses thundered closer. She raised her fist and pounded on the door. "Please!" Her voice cracked, raw and desperate. "Please, I need help!" Nothing. Clara pounded again, harder, using both fists. "Please! They're coming! Please!" The approaching hoofbeats slowed. They'd reached the edge of the clearing. Through the rain, she could see 3 mounted figures, dark shapes against the storm. One of them was Edgar. She knew his silhouette, the way he sat a horse, like a man surveying property he owned. "Clara!" His voice carried clearly despite the rain. "Enough of this foolishness! Come here at once!" She pressed her back against the door, as if she could melt through it. Her whole body shook, cold, fear, exhaustion, rage. 2 years. 2 years of his control, his manipulation, his slow, tightening grip on her life. 2 years of watching him play the concerned stepfather while he stole her inheritance and planned her future like she was livestock to be traded. 2 years since her mother died screaming in agony while Edgar stood by her bedside looking almost satisfied. "No," Clara whispered. The door opened behind her. She fell backward into warmth and lamplight and the startled presence of another human being. Strong hands caught her shoulders, not grabbing, not restraining, just steadying her before she could hit the floor. "Whoa there," a man's voice said, low and calm. "I've got you." Clara twisted to look up at him. He was tall, lean, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and eyes that registered surprise but not alarm. He wore a simple work shirt and suspenders, and there was something about the careful way he held her, supporting without confining, that made her want to weep. "Men," she gasped out. "Chasing me, please." He nodded once, understanding immediately. His hands released her shoulders and he stepped around her to the doorway. Clara scrambled to her feet, pressing herself against the wall as she watched him fill the doorframe. Outside, Edgar had dismounted. He stood at the base of the porch steps, rain running off his hat brim. The two men with him, ranch hands Clara recognized, flanked him on either side, still mounted. "Evening," the cabin's owner said. His voice remained calm, but Clara heard the edge beneath it. "Something I can help you with?" "Indeed there is," Edgar replied smoothly. "That young woman is my stepdaughter. She's had a difficult time since her mother's passing. Grief affects the mind in terrible ways. I'm grateful you've given her shelter, but I'll take her home now." "Is that right?" the man said. It wasn't a question. "She's not well," Edgar continued, his voice taking on that reasonable, concerned tone Clara knew so well. "Prone to flights of fancy, emotional outbursts. The doctor has recommended rest and careful supervision. You understand, a young woman alone without family guidance can come to harm." Clara's hands clenched into fists. Every word was a lie wrapped in truth, poison served with honey. Yes, her mother had died. Yes, Clara had been devastated. But Edgar had been the one to cause that grief, to poison that death into existence, to use Clara's mourning as cover for his control. "That's so," the man in the doorway said. He still hadn't moved, hadn't stepped aside. "Ma'am, that your stepfather?" The question was directed at Clara. She pushed off from the wall, moving to where she could see both men. "Yes," she said, and her voice shook but held. "That's Edgar Crowley. He married my mother 3 years ago." "And the rest?" the man asked quietly. "What he said about you." Clara met his eyes. They were brown, she noticed, dark and steady and completely focused on her, waiting, not assuming, not deciding for her, asking. "Lies," she said. "Almost every word." The man nodded slowly. Then he looked back at Edgar. "Think you should leave." Edgar's reasonable expression cracked slightly. "Now see here. Private property," the man interrupted. "Lady says she doesn't want to go with you. That's all I need to know." "She's not capable of making that determination." Edgar's voice rose, anger bleeding through. "She's a child." "I'm 20 years old," Clara shouted. The words burst out of her, 2 years of silence breaking like a dam. "I inherited my mother's estate when she died. You're supposed to be my guardian until I'm 21, but that's not what you are. You're a thief and a liar, and I know what you did to her." Silence fell, broken only by the rain. Edgar stared at her, and in that moment, Clara saw past his mask to the cold calculation beneath. He was weighing options, measuring risks, deciding how to proceed. This was the man who had patiently poisoned her mother over months, making it look like wasting sickness. The man who had systematically isolated Clara from her mother's friends and relatives. The man who had forged documents and siphoned funds and arranged a marriage to his business partner's son, all while playing the role of concerned guardian. "You don't know what you're saying," Edgar said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "The grief has confused you, Clara, made you see malice where there was only care. Come home. We'll get you help." "No." "Clara, I said no." She stepped forward into the lamplight spilling from the doorway. Rain still hammered the porch roof, but she felt suddenly steady, suddenly clear. "I won't go back. I won't marry James Rutherford. I won't sign over my inheritance. I won't pretend anymore that I don't know what you are." Edgar's face hardened. "You're coming home. Tonight." The man in the doorway shifted his stance slightly. Clara couldn't see his expression, but she saw Edgar's eyes flick to him and away. "Boys," Edgar said quietly. The two mounted ranch hands moved their horses forward. One of them, a man named Dutch, who'd worked for Edgar for years, reached for his rifle. "Wouldn't," the cabin's owner said. His voice remained calm, but something in it made Dutch freeze. "This is private property, and the lady's made her wishes clear. You're trespassing. Keep going, and we're into territory involving territorial law officers." "You think you can stop us?" Edgar asked softly. "Don't need to stop you. Just need to slow you down enough for the lady to get to Fort Kearney in the morning and tell her story to the federal marshal." The man paused. "Think that's a conversation you want to have, Mr. Crowley?" Edgar's jaw clenched. He was trapped. Advancing meant violence, and violence meant attention, investigations, questions he couldn't afford. But retreating meant losing control of Clara, losing access to her inheritance, losing everything he'd spent 2 years setting up. "This isn't over," Edgar said finally. He looked at Clara, and his eyes promised retribution. "You think you can hide? You think you can run? That inheritance is mine by right of guardianship. The marriage contract is signed. You'll be Mrs. James Rutherford before summer's end, or you'll be disinherited and destitute. Get off my property," the cabin's owner said. Edgar held Clara's gaze for one more long moment. Then he turned and mounted his horse in one smooth motion. The 3 riders wheeled around and disappeared into the storm, hoofbeats fading into rain and thunder. Clara stood frozen on the porch, shaking. She'd done it. She'd actually defied him, spoken the truth out loud, refused to return, and Edgar would never forgive her for it. "Ma'am?" The gentle voice brought her back. She turned to find the cabin's owner watching her with concern. "You should come inside," he said. "Get warm. Get dry." He paused, then added carefully, "If you want to." If she wanted to. Clara looked at him, really looked. He stood with one hand on the doorframe, his posture open, unthreatening. He was giving her space to choose, not demanding, not assuming, not even suggesting what the right choice might be. Just offering. "Thank you," Clara whispered. Yes, please." He stepped back, holding the door. She crossed the threshold into warmth and light. The cabin was small, one main room with a fireplace, a simple kitchen area, a narrow bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs. It was clean and spare, everything precisely in its place, the kind of home maintained by someone who lived alone and liked it that way. Clara stood dripping on the floorboards, suddenly acutely aware that she was a muddy disaster invading a stranger's sanctuary. "I'm sorry," she started. "I'm ruining your floor." "Floor's seen worse." He moved past her to the fireplace, stirring the coals and adding wood. Flames caught and grew. "You're soaked through, probably freezing." "I'm fine," Clara said automatically. He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. "You're shaking hard enough I can see it from here." Clara looked down at her hands. He was right. They trembled visibly, fingers white with cold. Her teeth had started chattering. "There's a screen there," the man said, nodding toward a folding partition near the bed. "I've got a spare shirt and some trousers that'll drown you, but they're dry. You should get out of those wet things before you catch pneumonia." Clara hesitated. 2 years of Edgar's household had taught her to be suspicious of men's offers, to look for the trap, the price, the hidden expectation. "I'll step outside," the man added quietly. "Give you privacy. You can bolt the door if you want." "In the rain?" Clara asked. He shrugged. "Got a porch. Won't melt." He was already moving toward the door. Clara watched him, trying to understand. In her experience, men didn't volunteer to stand in the rain while a woman made herself vulnerable in their own home. They didn't offer without expecting something in return. "Wait," she said. "What's your name?" He paused, hand on the doorknob. "Nathan Cole." "I'm Clara Whitmore." Figured as much. A small smile touched his mouth. "Your stepfather was pretty free with the information." Despite everything, Clara felt her own lips twitch. "He does like to talk." "That he does." Nathan opened the door, letting in a gust of rain-scented air. "I'll be on the porch. Take your time. There's a blanket on the bed if you need it." He stepped out and closed the door behind him. Clara stood alone in the warm cabin, listening to the rain and the crackle of the fire. Through the window, she could just see Nathan's silhouette on the porch, standing with his back to the cabin, giving her complete privacy. She moved quickly then, before she could overthink it. Behind the screen, she peeled off her soaked dress, her sodden petticoat, her muddy stockings. Everything was ruined, torn, stained beyond repair. The dress had been one of her mother's. Clara felt a pang of grief looking at it crumpled on the floor. The clothes Nathan had mentioned were folded neatly on a shelf, a worn flannel shirt and canvas work pants. Clara pulled them on. The shirt fell to mid-thigh. The pants required rolling at the ankles and cinching tight with a belt. She looked absurd, swimming in men's clothing. She'd never felt more comfortable. There was a towel, too. Clara dried her hair as best she could, working out tangles with her fingers. In the small mirror hanging on the wall, she caught sight of herself, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, her hair a wild tangle around her shoulders. She looked half drowned and half feral. She looked free. Clara wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and went to the door. She opened it to find Nathan exactly where she'd left him, standing in the rain. "You can come in now," she said. He turned, water streaming from his hat. "You decent?" "Yes." Nathan stepped inside, shaking water from his coat. He hung it and his hat on pegs by the door, moving with the efficient economy of someone used to caring for himself. His shirt was soaked, plastered to his shoulders. "Your turn," Clara said. "You should get dry, too." In a minute, he crossed to the kitchen area and began setting a kettle on the stove. "Coffee first. You look like you need something hot." Clara wrapped the blanket tighter and moved to the fireplace, drawn to the warmth. Now that the adrenaline was fading, she felt the full weight of exhaustion settling into her bones. Her legs trembled, her hands ached. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing up to Edgar, for letting me in, for asking what I wanted instead of just deciding for me." Nathan glanced at her as he measured coffee grounds. Seemed like the right thing to do. Most men wouldn't have. "Then most men are fools." He said it matter-of-factly, without pride or posturing, just a simple statement. "You want to tell me what happened? Or would you rather not?" Clara was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Where did she even start? How did she explain 2 years of slow suffocation, of watching Edgar tighten his control while everyone around them saw only a concerned stepfather caring for his grieving stepdaughter? "My mother died 2 years ago," she said finally. "May of 1873. She was sick for months, couldn't keep food down, terrible pain, wasting away. The doctor said it was her stomach, some kind of growth. She was in agony at the end." Nathan brought 2 tin cups to the table and sat down, listening. Clara remained standing by the fire. It was easier to talk when she didn't have to meet anyone's eyes. "Edgar was so attentive," she continued, her voice tight. "So devoted. Everyone remarked on it. What a good husband he was, how he never left her side. He brought her tea, made her meals, administered her medicine." She paused, remembering those last terrible months. Her mother's screams, the smell of sickness, Edgar's constant presence, always with a cup or a spoon or a sympathetic expression. "I didn't understand then," Clara said. "I was grieving, and Edgar seemed to be grieving too. He took over managing the estate, my mother's estate, the land and money she'd inherited from my father. Said I was too young to handle it, that he'd take care of everything until I came of age." "Let me guess," Nathan said quietly. Things started disappearing. Slowly. So slowly I almost didn't notice. Clara turned to face him. Money that should have been there wasn't. Properties sold off for less than they were worth. Debts appearing from nowhere. Edgar always had explanations. Bad investments, necessary expenses, my mother's medical bills, but the numbers never quite added up. She wrapped her arms around herself, cold despite the fire's warmth. Then 6 months ago, Edgar announced he'd found me a husband. James Rutherford, son of his business partner. Edgar made it sound like an honor, a good family, a prosperous future. But I didn't want to marry James. I barely knew him. When I said no, Edgar got angry, really angry. Nathan's expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened slightly around his coffee cup. "He told me I didn't have a choice," Clara continued, "that he was my legal guardian until I turned 21, and as guardian, he had the right to arrange my marriage. If I refused, he'd declare me mentally incompetent and have me committed to an asylum." "Jesus," Nathan muttered. He showed me the papers he'd already filed. Medical opinions from doctors I'd never met, stating I was unstable, prone to delusions, a danger to myself. All lies. But who would believe me over 3 physicians and my own stepfather? Clara moved to the table and sat down across from Nathan. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around the warm coffee cup. So I pretended to agree, she said. I smiled and nodded and let him think he'd won. But I started paying attention, really paying attention, to what he said, where he went, what papers he kept locked in his office. You were looking for evidence, Nathan said. I was looking for proof. Clara met his eyes. Because about a month ago, I was helping the housekeeper clean out Mother's old room, and I found a journal she'd hidden, just a small book tucked into the lining of her hat box. The entries started about 6 months before she got sick. Clara's throat tightened with old grief. She was worried about money, Clara continued softly. She'd noticed the same things I had. Funds going missing, papers Edgar asked her to sign that didn't make sense. She'd started to suspect he was stealing from her. And then she got sick. And she wrote about that too, Nathan said. Clara nodded. The last entries. Her handwriting was so shaky. She wrote about the tea Edgar brought her, how it always made her feel worse, how her symptoms seemed to ease when he was away on business, then came back when he returned. She'd started refusing the tea, making excuses, and she'd written one sentence, underlined 3 times. If something happens to me, protect Clara. The words hung in the air between them. You think he poisoned her, Nathan said. I know he did. Clara's voice was hard. Arsenic, probably. Small doses over months. It mimics stomach illness. By the time anyone suspects, it's too late to prove. And you told him you knew? Not until tonight. I was waiting, trying to gather more evidence, trying to figure out how to prove it. But tonight, Edgar told me the wedding was in 2 weeks. He'd arranged everything. After the ceremony, I'd sign papers transferring control of my inheritance to James, who'd immediately transfer it to Edgar, and then... Clara's voice cracked. And then I'd be completely under James's control. Edgar's control. Forever. She stopped, breathing hard. It was the first time she'd said it all out loud. The first time she'd let herself acknowledge the full scope of what Edgar had planned. So you ran, Nathan said. I grabbed what I could, climbed out my bedroom window, and ran. Clara looked down at her hands. Edgar organized a search party within an hour. I've been running since sunset. I hoped, I could make it to Fort Kearney, find someone official, someone who could help. But they were gaining on me. If I hadn't found your cabin... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the prairie, rain hammering against the cabin walls. Fort Kearney is about 15 miles east, he said finally. I ride mail and telegraph routes. I know the territory. There's a federal marshal there, Thomas Avery. He's a hard man, but a fair one. If you can tell him what you told me, show him your mother's journal. I don't have it, Clara interrupted. I couldn't risk taking it. Edgar would have noticed immediately. It's still hidden in my room. Nathan frowned. That makes things harder. Without evidence. I know, Clara's shoulders sagged. It's my word against his. And he spent 2 years building a reputation as the devoted guardian. He has doctor's statements, legal documents, witnesses who'll swear I'm unstable. What do I have? A story, suspicions, the word of a hysterical girl. You're not hysterical, Nathan said firmly. Edgar will say I am, and people will believe him. Clara felt the weight of it crushing down, the impossibility of fighting a man with money, connections, and the law on his side. Maybe I should have just married James. At least then, no. Nathan's voice was quiet, but absolute. You did the right thing. Running was brave. Brave or stupid? Brave. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Listen to me, Clara. What Edgar's doing, the control, the coercion, the planned marriage, that's wrong. You have a right to choose your own life. And if he really did poison your mother, then running wasn't just brave, it was survival. Clara felt tears building behind her eyes. She'd been so alone for so long, fighting this battle by herself, doubting her own perceptions. Having someone believe her, validate her, it was almost too much. Why are you helping me? She asked. You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. 6 years ago, he said finally, I had a younger sister, Emily. She was 17 when our parents died. I was 24, working cattle drives, trying to make enough to buy land. Our uncle took Emily in, said he'd care for her until she was old enough to marry. Clara saw where this was going and felt her heart sink. He was controlling, Nathan continued, his voice carefully even. Strict. Kept her isolated on his ranch, limited who she could see, what she could do. I didn't like it, but I was young and stupid, and he was family. I told myself Emily was safe, that our uncle was just old-fashioned, that she'd be free once she married. He paused, jaw tight. Then one day I got a letter. Emily had married this man our uncle chose, a friend of his, twice her age. 3 months later, she was dead. Horse riding accident, they said. But the neighbor woman who helped lay her out for burial wrote to me, told me Emily had bruises, old and new, told me she'd been terrified of her husband, told me she'd been planning to run. Nathan, Clara whispered. I should have helped her when she needed it, Nathan said. Should have taken her away from our uncle's house, consequences be damned. Should have given her a choice instead of trusting men who saw her as property. He looked at Clara directly. I can't help Emily now, but I can help you, and I'm not going to stand by and watch another young woman get forced into a life she doesn't want. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I'm sorry about your sister. Me too. Nathan stood and moved to the window, looking out at the storm. The rain's letting up. Come morning, if you're willing, I'll take you to Fort Kearney. We'll go to Marshal Avery together. Tell him everything. It might not be enough, but at least you'll have tried. Edgar will be watching the roads, Clara said. Then we'll go around. I know trails Edgar's men won't. Nathan turned back to her. But it's your choice, Clara. I'll help you get to the Marshal if that's what you want. Or I'll help you get to Lincoln, catch a train somewhere Edgar can't find you, or... He hesitated. Or you can stay here until you figure out what you want to do. This cabin's not much, but it's safe. I'll sleep in the barn. No one will bother you. Clara stared at him. You'd do that? Just let me stay? It's your choice, Nathan repeated. I'm not going to decide for you. Fresh tears came, harder this time. For 2 years, every choice had been stripped away. Where she went, what she did, who she saw, who she married, all decided by Edgar. And here was this stranger, this quiet man who owed her nothing, giving her choices instead of commands. I want to go to the Marshal, she said, her voice shaking. I want to fight this. Even if I lose, I want to try. Nathan nodded. Then that's what we'll do. He crossed to a chest in the corner and pulled out blankets and a pillow. You take the bed. I'll make a pallet by the fire. Nathan, you don't have to... I do, actually. He gave her a small smile. My mama raised me right. Lady gets the bed. Clara was too exhausted to argue. She moved to the narrow bed and sat down, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. The mattress felt impossibly soft after hours of running. Nathan banked the fire and stretched out on his makeshift pallet, his back to her, giving her privacy even in this small space. Clara lay down and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The cabin was warm and dry. The rain had gentled to a soft patter. She was safe, for tonight at least, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Edgar's face, the cold calculation in his eyes, the way he'd looked at her on the porch, making promises of retribution. Nathan, she whispered into the darkness. Yeah? What if the Marshal doesn't believe me? What if there's no evidence, no witnesses, nothing to prove what Edgar did? Silence stretched. Then we'll figure something else out. But what if... Clara. Nathan's voice was gentle but firm. You can't plan for every possibility right now. You're exhausted. You're scared. That's normal. But right now, tonight, you're safe. Tomorrow we'll take the first step. We'll worry about the second step after that. Clara breathed slowly, trying to let his words sink in. I'm not used to this, she admitted. Used to what? Someone being kind without wanting something in return. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was sad. I'm sorry that's your experience of the world. Not the whole world, Clara said softly. Not you. Another silence. Then, get some sleep, Clara. Morning comes early. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the rain and the sound of another human being breathing quietly nearby. Not demanding, not controlling, just there. For the first time in 2 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. The storm rolled on across the prairie, washing the night clean, and in a small cabin beneath cottonwood trees, Clara Whitmore slept dreamlessly, safe for one more night, with morning and choice and the long road to justice waiting just beyond the horizon. Dawn broke pale and clean over the prairie, the storm's fury spent. Clara woke to birdsong and the smell of coffee, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back, the flight, the rain, Edgar's face promising retribution. She sat up quickly, heart racing. Easy. Nathan's voice came from the kitchen area. You're safe. Clara pushed hair from her face and looked around. Nathan stood at the stove, fully dressed, pouring coffee into tin cups. Through the window, she could see morning sunlight slanting across wet grass, making everything shimmer. The world looked scrubbed new. What time is it? She asked. Just past 6. Figured we should get an early start if we're riding to Fort Kearney. He brought her a cup. How'd you sleep? Better than I expected. Clara accepted the coffee gratefully. The truth was she'd slept hard and dreamless, exhaustion finally claiming her. Thank you for the bed. Floor wasn't bad. Nathan moved to his window, scanning the landscape with practiced eyes. Been watching since first light. No sign of your stepfather or his men. Clara joined him at the window, still wrapped in the blanket. The prairie stretched endlessly, grass bending in the morning breeze. No horses, no riders, just open country and sky. He's out there somewhere, she said quietly. Planning. Let him plan. We'll be planning too. Nathan turned to face her. I've been thinking about the route. Main road's too exposed. Edgar will have men watching it, but there's a series of ravines about 3 miles north that run roughly parallel to the road. They'll give us cover most of the way to the fort. How long will it take? 4, maybe 5 hours if we're careful. Longer than the direct route, but safer. He paused. You ever ridden astride? Clara shook her head. Only side saddle. You'll need to ride astride today. In those clothes, he gestured at the oversized shirt and pants she still wore, and on the terrain we're covering, side saddle won't work. Heat crept into Clara's cheeks. Ladies also don't usually run for their lives across the prairie. Nathan's tone was gentle but practical. I'm not trying to shock your sensibilities, Clara. I'm trying to keep you safe. Can you do it? Clara thought about Edgar, about the forced marriage, about spending the rest of her life as someone's property. Compared to that, sitting astride a horse seemed like nothing. Yes, she said. I can do it. Good. Nathan moved to the door. I'll saddle the horses. There's bread and cheese on the table. Eat what you can. It's a long ride. He stepped outside, leaving Clara alone. She dressed quickly, finger-combing her hair and braiding it simply. The face that looked back from the small mirror was pale and determined. She barely recognized herself in Nathan's clothes, her hair down, no corset or petticoats or any of the armor women wore in polite society. She looked like someone who could run, someone who could fight, someone who could choose. Clara ate the bread mechanically, not tasting it. Her mind was already miles ahead at Fort Kearney in Marshal Avery's office. What would she say? How would she prove any of it? Edgar had spent 2 years building his case that she was unstable. She had nothing but her word and a journal she couldn't access. The door opened and Nathan returned. Horses are ready. You should bring the blanket. Gets cold in those ravines. Clara wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl and followed him outside. 2 horses stood hitched to the post, Nathan's rangy bay gelding and a smaller paint mare. That's Rosie, Nathan said, nodding to the mare. She's steady, won't spook easy. I'll help you mount. He demonstrated how to place her foot in the stirrup, how to swing her leg over. It felt wildly improper and surprisingly natural at the same time. Clara settled into the saddle, feeling the horse's warmth and strength beneath her. Reins like this, Nathan showed her, positioning her hands. She'll follow my lead mostly, but you need to guide her over rough ground. Can you manage? I'll manage, Clara said, more confidently than she felt. Nathan mounted his bay in one fluid motion. For a moment he sat there, scanning the horizon again with that same careful attention. Then he looked at her. You ready? Clara thought about the question, really thought about it. Was she ready to face Edgar's lawyers and lies? Ready to stand in front of strangers and accuse her stepfather of murder? Ready to risk everything on the chance that someone might believe her? No, she said honestly, but let's go anyway. Nathan's mouth quirked in a small smile. Fair enough. They rode north, keeping to low ground where possible. Nathan set a steady pace, not too fast, but not dawdling either. He knew this country, Clara realized, knew every dip and rise, every cluster of trees, every place where the land offered concealment. The ravines he'd mentioned appeared after about an hour of riding, deep cuts in the prairie where ancient water had carved channels through soil and rock. Nathan led them down into the first one, the walls rising 8 feet on either side. Stay close, he said over his shoulder. These ravines twist and turn, easy to get lost if you don't know them. The ravine floor was still muddy from last night's rain. The horses picked their way carefully over slick stones and through shallow standing water. Above them, the prairie stretched vast and empty, but down here they were invisible, hidden in the earth's folds. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the horses' hooves and the occasional bird call. Clara found herself watching Nathan's back, the easy way he sat his horse, the constant alertness in how he scanned their surroundings. He'd said he rode mail routes, dangerous work, carrying payroll and correspondence through country that wasn't always friendly. Can I ask you something? Clara said finally. Sure. Why do you live out here alone, in a cabin in the middle of nowhere? Nathan was quiet for a moment, guiding his horse around a fallen log. I like the quiet, he said finally. No crowds, no politics, no people telling me what to think or how to live, just the work and the land and my own choices. Don't you get lonely? Sometimes. He glanced back at her. But lonely's better than trapped. Clara understood that. She'd been trapped in Edgar's house, surrounded by servants and neighbors and wedding planners, and she'd never felt more alone. What about you? Nathan asked. What did you do before all this? Nothing important. Clara heard the bitterness in her own voice. I was a lady. I did lady things, embroidery and calling cards and learning which fork to use. My mother tried to give me more, taught me to read ledgers, understand contracts, manage property. She wanted me to be able to protect myself, protect what was mine. But after she died, Edgar took all that away. Said education was wasted on women, that my only job was to be an obedient daughter and eventually an obedient wife. That what you want? To be obedient? No. The word came out fierce. I want to make my own choices. I want to run my own life. I want... She stopped, surprised by the strength of her own feelings. What? Nathan prompted gently. I want what you have, Claire admitted. The freedom to just be, without someone always telling me what I should want, who I should be, how I should live. You can have that, Nathan said. Might take some fighting to get it, but you can have it. You really think so? I know so. He pulled his horse to a stop and turned to face her fully. Clara, listen to me. What Edgar's done, stealing your inheritance, controlling your life, trying to force you into marriage, that's not how it has to be. There are places where women own property, make their own decisions. There are women who run businesses, manage ranches, live independent lives. It's not easy and it's not common, but it's possible. Where? Clara asked. Where are these magical places? Right here sometimes. The frontier doesn't have as many rules as back east. People are too busy surviving to worry about who's wearing pants or running a store. He paused. And out west, California, Oregon, I've heard there are whole communities where women have more freedom, where being unmarried and independent isn't seen as shameful. Hope flickered in Clara's chest, fragile and dangerous. You've been there? No, but I've met people who have, and I've seen enough to know that the way Edgar thinks the world works, women as property, obedience as virtue, that's not universal truth. It's just one way of thinking, and it's a way you don't have to accept. Clara stared at him, this quiet man who kept offering her possibilities instead of limitations. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know that even if the marshal can't help, even if Edgar wins in court, you still have options. You can still choose freedom, even if it means running, even if it means starting over with nothing. Nathan's eyes were steady on hers. I know it's not fair that you'd have to, but I want you to know it's possible. Before Clara could respond, Nathan's head snapped up, attention caught by something. He held up a hand for silence and listened intently. Clara heard it too, the distant sound of horses, maybe 3 or 4, coming from the east. Down, Nathan whispered urgently. They dismounted quickly, Nathan leading both horses behind a large outcropping of rock. Clara pressed herself against the stone, heart hammering. Through a gap in the ravine wall, she could see movement on the prairie above. Riders spreading out in a search pattern. Edgar's men. Nathan stood completely still beside her, one hand on his horse's nose to keep it quiet. The riders came closer, near enough that Clara could hear their voices. "Boss says she's heading for the fort," one man called. "Wants us to cut her off." "Waste of time if you ask me," another replied. "Girl's probably halfway to Lincoln by now." "Edgar don't pay us to think. He says search, we search." The voices faded as the riders moved past, continuing their sweep. Nathan waited a full 5 minutes after the last sound died away before he moved. "They're between us and the fort," he said quietly, "but they're searching the main road and the open prairie. They don't know about these ravines." "How many men does Edgar have?" Clara asked. "Saw 4 just now. He had 3 with him last night. Could be more." Nathan checked the sky, gauging the sun's position. "We need to keep moving. The ravines will take us most of the way, but there's about a mile of open ground before Fort Kearney. We'll need to time it right. Make sure Edgar's men aren't watching." They mounted again and continued through the twisting channels. The ravines grew deeper in places, the walls rising 12 feet or more. It was like traveling through veins in the earth, hidden from the world above. Around midday, Nathan called a halt near a place where a spring seeped from the ravine wall, creating a small pool of clear water. They let the horses drink while sharing what was left of the bread. "Can I ask you something else?" Clara said. Nathan nodded. "Last night you said I was brave for running, but I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." "Brave and terrified aren't opposites," Nathan said. "Brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. If you weren't scared, it wouldn't take courage." Clara considered this. "Were you scared? When you stood up to Edgar?" "Yes." Nathan's answer was immediate and honest. "Your stepfather strikes me as the kind of man who holds grudges, who makes examples of people who cross him, standing between him and something he wants. That's not safe." "Then why did you do it?" Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Because letting him take you would have been worse than any consequence he could arrange for me. Because my sister died alone and scared, and I couldn't help her. Because you knocked on my door asking for help, and I'm not the kind of man who can hear that and do nothing." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry I brought trouble to your door." "Don't be." Nathan's voice was firm. "You didn't bring trouble. Edgar did. You just asked for help, and there's no shame in that." He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, we should keep moving." They rode for another 2 hours, the ravines gradually growing shallower. Finally, Nathan pulled to a stop at a place where the ravine walls had worn down to just a few feet. "Fort's about a mile that way," he said, pointing east. "Open ground between here and there. We need to watch for patrols, Edgar's men and legitimate army patrols both." "Why would we avoid the army?" Clara asked. "Because if they stop us, they'll ask questions. And if Edgar's already spread the story that you're mentally unwell and I've kidnapped you, we could end up detained before we ever reach the marshal." Clara hadn't thought of that. Of course Edgar would have prepared the ground, planted his version of events. By now there might already be wanted notices, descriptions circulated, rewards offered. "So how do we get in?" she asked. Nathan studied the fort in the distance, a collection of buildings behind wooden palisades, with the town growing up around it like moss on a stone. "There's a boarding house on the edge of town," he said, "run by a woman named Abigail Turner. She's someone who helps people sometimes, people in difficult situations. If we can reach her, she might know how to get you to the marshal safely." "You know her?" "We've crossed paths. She helped a friend of mine once, a woman in circumstances similar to yours." Nathan looked at Clara. Mrs. Turner doesn't ask a lot of questions, but she has strong opinions about men who mistreat women. If she believes you, she'll move heaven and earth to help. And if she doesn't believe me, then we'll figure out another plan. Nathan's tone was matter of fact. But we won't know until we try. They waited until late afternoon, when the sun was low enough to make seeing difficult, but not so late that their arrival would seem suspicious. Then Nathan led the way out of the ravine and across the open prairie. Clara felt exposed immediately, vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt in the hidden ravines. Every distant sound made her flinch. Every bird taking flight seemed like a signal. She kept expecting to hear shouts, hoofbeats, Edgar's voice commanding her to stop. But they crossed the open ground without incident. The town materialized around them gradually, first scattered homesteads, then a proper street with a general store, a saloon, a church. People moved about their business, paying little attention to two travel-stained riders. Nathan led them to a large wooden building set back from the main street. A hand-painted sign read, "Turner House, Rooms and Board." They dismounted and tied the horses. Clara was stiff from riding, her legs trembling as she stood. Nathan noticed and steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "You did good," he said quietly. "We made it." Before Clara could respond, the door of the boarding house opened and a woman appeared on the porch. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that took in Clara's appearance in one sweeping glance. The oversized men's clothes, the exhaustion, the barely concealed fear. "Nathan Cole," the woman said. "Been a while." "Mrs. Turner." Nathan removed his hat respectfully. "I need your help." "I can see that." Mrs. Turner's gaze shifted to Clara. "What's your name, child?" "Clara Whitmore, ma'am." Something flickered in Mrs. Turner's expression. "Any relation to Edgar Crowley?" Clara's heart sank. "He's my stepfather. How did you—" "Man's been in town since yesterday, talking to anyone who'll listen. Says his stepdaughter's gone missing, likely kidnapped by a drifter. Says she's not well in the head, might be dangerous to herself." Mrs. Turner's tone was dry. "I'm guessing you have a different version of events." "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "Very different." Mrs. Turner studied her for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come inside, both of you. We'll talk where there aren't eyes and ears." They followed her into a parlor furnished with well-worn but comfortable chairs. Mrs. Turner closed the door firmly and gestured for them to sit. "Tell me everything," she said, "and don't leave anything out." So Clara told her story again. Her mother's death, the suspicion of poison, Edgar's theft and control, the forced marriage, her flight through the storm. Nathan added details about the confrontation at his cabin, the search parties, their journey through the ravines. Mrs. Turner listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly grim. "You have evidence?" she asked when Clara finished. "This journal you mentioned?" "It's hidden in my room at Edgar's house. I couldn't take it without him noticing. And without it, it's your word against his." "I know." Clara felt despair creeping back. "But I have to try. I have to at least tell Marshal Avery." "The Marshal left for Omaha 3 days ago," Mrs. Turner said. "Won't be back for a week." Clara felt the last of her hope crumble. A week. Edgar would find her long before then. She'd be dragged back, declared incompetent, locked away, or married off before the Marshal ever returned. "There's a deputy," Nathan said. "Marcus Webb. He's young, but honest." "He's also Edgar Crowley's nephew," Mrs. Turner interrupted. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Related by marriage," Mrs. Turner continued. "Edgar's late wife's family, the boy's probably straight as an arrow, but he won't move against his own kin, not without overwhelming evidence." Clara closed her eyes. Of course. Of course Edgar would have connections here, relatives, people loyal to him. He'd probably planned for the possibility of her running to Fort Kearney, had already laid groundwork to ensure she'd find no help. "So that's it then," she said dully. "There's nothing I can do." "I didn't say that." Mrs. Turner's voice was sharp. "I said the deputy won't help. I didn't say you're without options." Clara looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean Edgar Crowley isn't the only one with connections in this territory. I mean, there are other authorities besides local marshals, And I mean, Mrs. Turner leaned forward, her eyes fierce, that I've seen a dozen girls in your position over the years, and I'm damned if I'll watch another one get dragged back to a man who treats her like property. What can you do? Nathan asked. First, get her off the street before Edgar's men spot her. She can stay here. I've got a room in the back where she'll be safe. Mrs. Turner stood and began pacing, her mind clearly working through possibilities. Second, we need that journal. It's the only real evidence she has. Without it, even sympathetic authorities will have trouble moving against Edgar. I can't go back there, Clara said. Edgar will be watching the house. You won't go. I will. Mrs. Turner stopped pacing. I'm a respectable widow running a boarding house. I've met Edgar socially. I can call on him, express concern about his missing stepdaughter, offer my assistance in the search. While I'm there, if you can tell me exactly where this journal is hidden, I might be able to retrieve it. Hope flickered again, fragile. It's in my mother's old room, third door on the left upstairs. The journal's in a hat box on the top shelf of the wardrobe, tucked into the lining. That's specific enough? Mrs. Turner nodded. I'll go tomorrow. Today, I need to make some other arrangements. What kind of arrangements? Nathan asked. The kind that involve a federal judge who owes me a favor and a telegraph operator who knows how to be discreet. Mrs. Turner's smile was grim. Edgar may have the local deputy in his pocket, but he doesn't own everyone. Not yet. Clara felt tears building. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Mrs. Turner's expression softened slightly. I knew your mother, child. Not well, but we'd met at church functions, charity events. She was a good woman, kind, intelligent, stronger than people gave her credit for. When I heard she'd died, I wondered. And when Edgar remarried so quickly after her death, she shook her head. Let's just say I've learned to trust my instincts about men like him. You suspected, Clara whispered. I suspected. But suspicion isn't proof. And by the time I'd gathered myself to act, Edgar had you locked down tight. I tried calling on you twice. Was turned away both times, told you were indisposed. Mrs. Turner's jaw tightened. I should have pushed harder. It's not your fault, Clara said. Maybe not, but I can do something about it now. Mrs. Turner moved to the door. Nathan, take Clara to the back room. There's water for washing and clean clothes that should fit well enough. Clara, you stay out of sight until we figure out our next move. If anyone asks, Nathan, you're here delivering a message from your mail route. Nothing unusual. Nathan stood. What are you going to do? What I do best, Mrs. Turner said. Talk to people, pull threads, see what unravels. She left, closing the door firmly behind her. Nathan turned to Clara. You trust her? Do you? I think so. She helped my friend Sarah when her husband was beating her, got her out, got her to family in Denver, made sure the husband couldn't follow. Mrs. Turner's got a reputation. She doesn't tolerate abuse of any kind. Clara nodded slowly. She didn't have much choice but to trust. The alternatives were running blindly or surrendering to Edgar, and neither was acceptable. Nathan led her down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It was simply furnished, a bed, a washstand, a chair, but it was clean and private and safe. I'll be right outside, Nathan said. If you need anything, call out. Nathan, Clara stopped him before he could leave. Thank you for everything, for believing me, for bringing me here, for just being decent. He looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. It's what anyone should do. But most people wouldn't. Most people would have turned me away, or turned me over to Edgar, or not wanted to get involved. Clara met his eyes. You're a good man, Nathan Cole. Just trying to do right, he said quietly, like I should have done for Emily. He left before she could respond, closing the door gently. Clara sat on the bed and finally let herself cry, deep, wrenching sobs that came from some place she'd kept locked tight for 2 years. She cried for her mother, for the life stolen from her, for the terror and exhaustion and desperate hope of the last day. She cried until she had nothing left, until the tears dried up and left only hollow determination. Then she washed her face in the basin, changed into the clean dress Mrs. Turner had left, and sat by the window to wait. Outside, the sun sank lower. In the main street, she could hear occasional voices, the sound of horses, normal life continuing. Somewhere out there, Edgar was hunting her. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Turner was pulling threads. And somewhere deep inside herself, Clara found reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She'd come this far. She'd escaped Edgar's house, survived the storm, found help. She'd told her truth to people who believed her. Whatever came next, she would face it. The door opened and Nathan returned carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and tea. Mrs. Turner sent this, said you should eat. Clara accepted the tray. Did she say anything else? She's going to the telegraph office in the morning, then to Edgar's house. Nathan sat in the chair, looking suddenly tired. We wait and hope she succeeds. And if she doesn't? Then we run again. Keep running until we find someone who can help, or until we're far enough away that Edgar can't reach you. Clara sipped the tea, letting the warmth spread through her. You'd do that? Just keep running with me? If that's what it takes. Why? Clara asked. And don't tell me it's just about your sister. That's part of it, but there's something else. Nathan was quiet for a long time, his expression distant. You asked why I live alone, he said finally. Truth is, I got tired of compromising. Tired of society's rules about who matters and who doesn't. Tired of seeing power used to control instead of protect. Out here, I can live by my own code. Help who needs helping. Stand up to bullies without worrying about social consequences. He looked at her directly. Edgar Crowley is a bully, a dangerous one, with money and connections and the law on his side. But at the end of the day, he's still just a man who uses power to hurt people weaker than himself. And I'm still just a man who can't abide that. Nathan's voice was quiet but firm. So yeah, I'll keep helping you, not because you're helpless, you're not, but because everyone deserves someone in their corner when they're fighting monsters. Clara set down her tea with trembling hands. I don't know how to thank you. Don't need thanks, just need you to keep fighting. Keep believing you deserve better than what Edgar planned for you. Nathan stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left her alone with her thoughts and her fragile hope. Clara lay down on the bed, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Mrs. Turner would walk into Edgar's house and try to steal the one piece of evidence that might save Clara's life. Tomorrow, they'd send telegrams to federal authorities who might or might not care about one woman's accusations against a wealthy man. Tomorrow, the fight would truly begin. But tonight, Clara was safe. Fed. Believed. For now, that was enough. She slept fitfully, waking at every creak and footstep, her mind unable to fully surrender to rest. When pale dawn light finally crept through the window, Clara rose and dressed in the simple calico dress Mrs. Turner had provided. Her own ruined clothing lay folded in the corner, a reminder of how far she'd come in just 2 days. Voices drifted from somewhere in the house. Low conversation, the clatter of dishes. Clara opened her door cautiously and followed the sounds to a small dining room where Nathan sat with Mrs. Turner, both drinking coffee and speaking in hushed tones. They looked up as she entered. Good morning, Mrs. Turner said, her sharp eyes assessing Clara. You look better, still exhausted, but better. I slept some, Clara said, which was mostly true. Sit, eat. Mrs. Turner gestured to a plate of eggs and toast. You'll need your strength today. Clara obeyed, suddenly ravenous despite her churning anxiety. Nathan poured her coffee and she accepted it gratefully. I sent the telegrams an hour ago, Mrs. Turner said without preamble. One to Federal Judge Harrison in Omaha. He's an old friend, owes me more favors than I can count. The other to a lawyer I know in Lincoln, woman named Catherine Wells. She specializes in property disputes and inheritance law. If anyone can untangle Edgar's financial manipulations, it's her. When will they respond? Clara asked. Could be today, could be 3 days. Telegraph system's not always reliable. Mrs. Turner set down her cup. But I'm not waiting. I'm calling on your stepfather this morning. Clara's stomach clenched. Are you sure that's safe? Safer than you going, certainly. Edgar doesn't know I suspect anything. As far as he's concerned, I'm just a concerned neighbor offering assistance in his time of distress. Her tone was sardonic. Men like Edgar never suspect women of having their own agendas. We're too simple-minded for that. Nathan snorted. That's his mistake. Indeed it is, Mrs. Turner stood and smoothed her skirts. I'll express sympathy, offer to organize a search party, ask if there's anything I can do to help. While he's performing his worried stepfather routine, I'll excuse myself to use the powder room and retrieve that journal. 10 minutes, in and out. What if you're caught? Clara asked. Then I'll claim I was looking for Clara's room, hoping to find some clue to her whereabouts. I'm a meddling old woman. Edgar will believe that easily enough. Mrs. Turner's expression hardened. But I won't be caught. I've been playing this particular game longer than Edgar Crowley has been alive. She moved toward the door, then paused. Nathan, keep Clara out of sight. Don't answer the door for anyone except me. If something goes wrong, if I'm not back by noon, take her and ride west. Don't stop until you're across the territorial line. Understood, Nathan said quietly. Mrs. Turner looked at Clara. Your mother was a strong woman, child. She fought Edgar in her own way, left you those journals as weapons. Don't let her sacrifice be for nothing. I won't, Clara promised. Then Mrs. Turner was gone, the door closing firmly behind her. Clara and Nathan sat in heavy silence, listening to the sounds of the boarding house waking around them. Other guests stirring, footsteps on stairs, the muffled conversations of morning routines. She'll be fine, Nathan said, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as Clara. Mrs. Turner's clever. She knows how to handle men like Edgar. I hope you're right. Clara pushed her eggs around the plate, no longer hungry. What if he's already destroyed the journal? What if he found it after I ran and burned it? Then we'll find another way. Nathan's voice was firm. Evidence isn't just journals and documents. There are people who saw things, who knew your mother. The doctor who treated her, the servants in Edgar's house, your mother's friends. Someone knows something that can help. Clara wanted to believe him, but 2 years of Edgar's careful manipulations had taught her how thoroughly one man could rewrite reality. The doctor who'd treated her mother had been Edgar's choice, had signed the death certificate without question. The servants were all Edgar's employees, dependent on him for their livelihoods. Her mother's friends had been slowly cut off, one by one, through subtle social maneuvering. You're thinking too loud, Nathan observed. I can practically hear the despair from here. Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch. Sorry. Don't apologize. Just don't give up before we've even started fighting. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Look, I know Edgar seems all-powerful right now, but powerful men make mistakes. They get arrogant, careless. They underestimate people, especially women. That's going to be his downfall. How can you be so sure? Because he underestimated you, Nathan said simply. He thought you'd just accept the marriage, sign the papers, be a good obedient daughter. Instead, you climbed out a window in the middle of a storm and ran. That wasn't in his plan. Clara considered this. He was right. Edgar had been genuinely shocked when she fled. Angry, yes, but also surprised. He'd thought he had her completely controlled. And he underestimated Mrs. Turner, Nathan continued. Dismissed her as just another society woman. He has no idea she's been fighting men like him for 20 years. Before Clara could respond, the front door opened and closed. Both of them tensed, listening. Footsteps in the hall, moving toward the dining room. Mrs. Turner appeared in the doorway, her expression triumphant. She held up a small leather-bound journal. Got it, she said. Relief flooded through Clara so powerfully she felt dizzy. What happened? Mrs. Turner sat down and set the journal carefully on the table. Edgar performed exactly as expected, all concern and worry, wringing his hands over his poor, disturbed stepdaughter. Said you'd been growing increasingly erratic, talking about conspiracies and poison. He's building quite the narrative. Did anyone else hear him? Nathan asked. 2 of his ranch hands were there, backing up his story. They looked uncomfortable, though. I don't think they entirely believe him. Mrs. Turner opened the journal carefully. While Edgar was explaining his search efforts, I excused myself and went upstairs. Found the journal exactly where Clara said it would be. Tucked it into my bag and came straight back. Clara reached for the journal with trembling hands. Her mother's handwriting covered the pages, neat at first, and then growing increasingly shaky as the illness progressed. Just seeing those familiar loops and curves made Clara's throat tighten. May I? Mrs. Turner asked gently. Clara nodded and handed it back. Mrs. Turner began reading, her expression growing grimmer with each page. Nathan moved to read over her shoulder. "Dear God," Mrs. Turner whispered. She documented everything. The financial irregularities, Edgar's controlling behavior, her suspicions about the tea he brought her. She turned to a page near the end and read aloud. March 14th, 1873. The pain is worse today. Edgar brought his special tea again, and I pretended to drink it, but poured it in the plant pot when he wasn't looking. Tonight I feel better than I have in weeks. Tomorrow I will try again to refuse it. I must get stronger. Must protect Clara. If I die, Edgar will have complete control of her and the estate. I cannot let that happen." Mrs. Turner's voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat and continued. March 18th, 1873. Edgar insisted I drink the tea today, stood over me until I swallowed it all. Within an hour, the cramping started again. I'm certain now. He is poisoning me. But I have no proof, no allies. The doctor is Edgar's friend. The servants are Edgar's employees. If I accuse him without evidence, he will say the illness has affected my mind. I am trapped. The room fell silent. Clara felt tears streaming down her face but made no move to wipe them away. Her mother had known, had understood exactly what was happening, and she'd been completely powerless to stop it. "There's more," Mrs. Turner said quietly. She flipped through pages, reading excerpts, details about missing money, forged signatures on property transfers, Edgar's meetings with James Rutherford about a marriage contract, and woven through it all, her mother's growing fear and desperate attempts to protect her daughter. The final entry was dated May 2nd, 1873, just 3 days before her mother died. Mrs. Turner's voice was barely above a whisper. "I am dying. I know this now. The poison has done too much damage, but I will not let Edgar win completely. I have hidden this journal where Clara will find it when she is ready. I have hidden my jewelry where he cannot steal it. And I have written letters to my lawyer in Lincoln, to Judge Harrison in Omaha, explaining my suspicions. If Clara finds this journal, she must find those letters. They are my last weapon against him. My darling daughter, if you are reading this, run. Run far and fast. Do not let him control you as he controlled me. You are stronger than you know. I love you always. Mother." Mrs. Turner closed the journal carefully. No one spoke for a long moment. "Letters," Clara finally said. She mentioned letters. "To Judge Harrison," Nathan said. "That's the judge Mrs. Turner telegraphed this morning." "He never mentioned receiving anything from Clara's mother," Mrs. Turner said thoughtfully, "which means either she never managed to send them or Edgar intercepted them." "Or they're still hidden somewhere," Clara said, "like the journal was hidden." "Where would she have put them?" Nathan asked. Clara closed her eyes, thinking. Her mother had been bedridden those last weeks, too weak to move much. Any hiding place would have needed to be accessible from her room. "The jewelry," Clara said suddenly. Mother mentioned hiding her jewelry. She had a cameo brooch that belonged to her grandmother, a pearl necklace from my father. Edgar claimed they were lost, sold to pay medical bills. But what if she hid them? What if the letters are with them? "Where would she hide jewelry in a sick room?" Mrs. Turner asked. Clara thought back to those awful final days. Her mother's room had been stripped of most personal items after her death, but the furniture had remained: the bed, the wardrobe, a writing desk, a vanity with a mirror. "The vanity," Clara said. "It has a hidden compartment. My father had it specially made. There's a small drawer behind the mirror that releases when you press a certain spot." She looked at Mrs. Turner. "I can't go back there. Edgar will be watching for me." "No, but I can." Mrs. Turner stood decisively. "I'll return this afternoon. Say I forgot my handkerchief or some such nonsense. While Edgar's distracted, I'll search the vanity." "That's twice in one day," Nathan said. "Twice is pushing your luck." "I've been pushing my luck for 20 years. Mrs. Turner tucked the journal into her bag. "Besides, this journal is damning, but the letters to a federal judge would be even better. We need every piece of evidence we can get." A knock at the front door made them all freeze. Mrs. Turner moved quickly to the window and peered out. "It's the telegraph operator," she said. "Young Tommy from the office." She hurried to answer the door. Clara and Nathan waited tensely in the dining room, listening to the muffled conversation. Mrs. Turner returned moments later with a telegram in her hand. From Judge Harrison, she said, breaking the seal. Her eyes scanned the message and her expression shifted to something like hope. He's coming. Says he remembers Clara's mother. Will be here day after tomorrow to conduct a preliminary investigation into the allegations. That fast? Nathan asked. Harrison doesn't waste time when it comes to matters of justice. And if he remembers Clara's mother, he might remember those letters. Mrs. Turner looked at Clara. 2 days. We need to keep you safe and hidden for 2 days. Can you do that? Yes, Clara said. The word came out stronger than she felt. But Edgar won't wait quietly. He'll be searching. Let him search. He won't find you here. Mrs. Turner's expression hardened. But you're right that we need to be careful. Edgar's dangerous, especially now that he knows you're actively fighting him. Nathan, you should stay here too. Sleep in the front parlor where you can watch the door. Agreed, Nathan said. Another knock, this one harder and more insistent. Mrs. Turner frowned and returned to the window. Her face went pale. It's Edgar, she said quietly, with 3 men, all armed. Clara's heart stopped. He knows I'm here. He suspects, or he's checking everywhere. Mrs. Turner's mind was clearly racing through options. Nathan, take Clara to the cellar. There's a root storage area in the back. Edgar won't think to look there if he's just making a courtesy call. Nathan was already moving, pulling Clara toward a door that led to the kitchen. Behind it, stairs descended into darkness. They hurried down as Mrs. Turner went to answer the door. The cellar was cool and dim, smelling of earth and stored vegetables. Nathan led Clara to the far back corner where crates and barrels created a natural hiding spot. They crouched behind them just as voices filtered down from above. Mrs. Turner, my apologies for the intrusion. Edgar's voice was smooth, but Clara heard the steel beneath it. I'm conducting a thorough search for my stepdaughter. I have reason to believe she may be in Fort Kearney. I haven't seen her, Mrs. Turner replied calmly. Though I've heard about your situation, terrible business. Indeed. I wonder if you'd permit me to check your boarding house, just to be thorough. Clara is not well, you understand. She might have sought shelter here without your knowledge. I'm afraid that's not possible, Mrs. Turner said firmly. I have guests who expect privacy. Unless you have legal authority to search, I have the authority of a concerned guardian searching for a mentally unstable young woman who poses a danger to herself. Edgar's voice hardened. Now, you can cooperate voluntarily, or I can return with the deputy and a warrant. Your choice. There was a tense pause. Clara pressed herself further into the shadows, her heart hammering. Nathan had his hand on his gun, though Clara prayed it wouldn't come to that. Very well, Mrs. Turner said finally. You may look, but only you, Edgar. Your armed men can wait outside. This is a respectable establishment. Of course. Edgar's footsteps moved through the house above them. Doors opened and closed. Clara could track his progress by sound. The front parlor, the dining room, the kitchen directly overhead. The cellar door opened. Light spilled down the stairs. Clara held her breath as Edgar's boots appeared on the steps, descending slowly. Nathan tensed beside her, ready to spring if discovered. Through a gap in the crates, Clara could see Edgar's face as he surveyed the cellar. Cold, calculating, suspicious. He moved through the space methodically, checking behind barrels, peering into corners. He was 10 feet away. 8 feet. 5 feet. Edgar! Mrs. Turner's voice called from upstairs. There's someone at the door asking for you. Says it's urgent. Edgar paused, clearly torn between continuing his search and answering the summons. Finally, he turned and climbed back up the stairs. The cellar door closed, leaving Clara and Nathan in darkness. They stayed frozen, listening. More voices upstairs, muffled conversation. Then the sound of the front door closing. Silence. Long minutes passed before Mrs. Turner appeared at the top of the cellar stairs. He's gone, she said, but we have a problem. Clara and Nathan climbed back up to find Mrs. Turner's face grave. That urgent message was about you, Clara. Edgar's filed official papers with the deputy. He's claiming you're mentally incompetent and a danger to yourself. He has a doctor's statement, witness testimony from his household staff, and a request for commitment to the Territorial Asylum in Lincoln. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. He can't do that. I haven't. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what he can prove in front of a judge. Mrs. Turner gripped Clara's shoulders. And right now, Edgar has paperwork and witnesses. We have a journal that could be dismissed as the ravings of a sick woman and no other evidence. If he gets you in front of a judge before Harrison arrives, you could be committed before we can stop it. Then we run, Nathan said. We leave now, ride hard, get across the territorial line. No. Clara's voice was firm despite her fear. No more running. If I run now, Edgar wins. He'll have me declared incompetent in absentia, seize the estate, and I'll be a fugitive with no legal standing. I have to stay and fight. Fighting from an asylum cell does you no good, Mrs. Turner pointed out. Then we make sure I don't end up in one. Clara looked between them. We have 2 days until Judge Harrison arrives. 2 days to gather more evidence, find those letters, build a case. We can do this. Edgar won't wait 2 days, Nathan said. He'll push for an immediate hearing. Then we delay him. Throw obstacles in his path, make him work for every inch. Clara was surprised by the strength in her own voice. She'd spent 2 years being passive, obedient, controlled. No more. What can we do to slow him down? Mrs. Turner's expression shifted to something fierce and approving. Now you're thinking like a fighter. All right, Edgar needs the deputy to move forward with commitment proceedings, but the deputy has to follow proper procedures. Notice periods, hearings, documentation. If we can tie him up in bureaucratic requirements, we buy time, Nathan finished. Exactly. Mrs. Turner began pacing, her mind working. I know the territorial law on commitment. Edgar needs 3 things: a doctor's statement declaring you incompetent, witness testimony, and a judge's order. He has the first 2. But the judge, that's Deputy Webb, acting as magistrate in Marshal Avery's absence. And young Marcus Webb may be Edgar's nephew, but he's also a stickler for following procedure correctly. So we make sure he follows every single procedure to the letter, Clara said, understanding. Give me 2 hours. Mrs. Turner was already moving toward the door. I'm going to call on Marcus Webb and have a friendly conversation about the importance of due process. By the time I'm done, he'll be so worried about doing everything correctly that Edgar won't get his hearing before Harrison arrives. What about the letters? Clara asked. The vanity in my mother's room? Tonight, Mrs. Turner said. After dark, Edgar will be focused on the legal proceedings. That's when I'll search. She left in a whirl of determined energy. Clara and Nathan were alone again, the boarding house quiet around them. You should eat something, Nathan said. The eggs are cold, but there's bread and cheese. Clara wasn't hungry, but she forced herself to eat anyway. Nathan was right. She needed strength. The next 2 days would require every ounce of will and courage she possessed. They spent the rest of the morning in tense waiting. Nathan kept watch at the windows while Clara read and reread her mother's journal, memorizing every detail, every piece of evidence. The words painted a damning picture of Edgar's cruelty and greed, but they also showed her mother's strength, her love, her determination to protect her daughter even from beyond the grave. Around noon, Mrs. Turner returned looking satisfied. It's done, she announced. Had a lovely conversation with Deputy Webb about his responsibilities as acting magistrate. Mentioned how closely federal authorities scrutinize territorial judicial proceedings, especially in cases involving property and inheritance. The boy's now terrified of making a mistake that might damage his career. Will he refuse Edgar's request? Clara asked. Not refuse, he can't do that outright without cause, but he'll insist on following every procedural requirement exactly. Notice periods, proper documentation, opportunity for the accused to respond. That gives us at least 3 days, probably 4. Mrs. Turner's smile was sharp. By which time Judge Harrison will be here, and Edgar's little commitment scheme will fall apart. Edgar won't accept the delay quietly, Nathan said. No, he won't, which is why we need to be ready for whatever he tries next. Mrs. Turner pulled out the journal again. Clara, I need you to go through this and mark every specific claim your mother made. Dates, amounts of money, names of people involved. We need to build a timeline of Edgar's crimes that's so clear even a hostile judge can't ignore it. Clara spent the afternoon doing exactly that, creating a detailed accounting of Edgar's theft and manipulation. The numbers were staggering. Over the 2 years since her mother's death, Edgar had systematically drained nearly $30,000 from the estate through false invoices, property sales below market value, and outright theft. As evening fell, Mrs. Turner prepared to return to Edgar's house. She dressed carefully in dark clothing, practical and unremarkable. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, assume something's gone wrong," she told Nathan. "Take Clara and run west like I said this morning." "Be careful," Clara said. "Always am." Mrs. Turner squeezed Clara's hand once, then slipped out into the gathering darkness. The waiting was unbearable. Clara paced the small back room while Nathan watched from the window. Minutes crawled past with agonizing slowness. An hour and a half. At the 2-hour mark exactly, the front door opened. Clara and Nathan both tensed, but it was Mrs. Turner's voice that called out, "It's me, and I have what we need." They rushed to meet her. Mrs. Turner stood in the parlor, breathing hard, her hair disheveled. But she was smiling, and in her hand she held a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. "The vanity compartment," she said triumphantly. Exactly where Clara said it would be, along with the jewelry Edgar claimed was sold. She handed the letters to Clara with reverent care. There were 3 of them, addressed to Judge Harrison, to a lawyer named Catherine Wells, and to the Territorial Attorney General. Clara's hand shook as she unfolded the first letter. Her mother's handwriting filled the page, weak but determined. The letter to Judge Harrison detailed everything: the poisoning, Edgar's theft, his plans for Clara's future. It was dated April 30th, 1873, less than a week before her mother died. "She never got to send them," Clara whispered. "She hid them hoping I'd find them." "But we found them now," Mrs. Turner said, "and that's what matters. These letters, combined with the journal, give us documentary evidence of your mother's suspicions before her death." "That's powerful, Clara. That shows this wasn't just grief or confusion on your part. Your mother knew what Edgar was doing and tried to warn authorities." "Will it be enough?" Nathan asked. "With Judge Harrison arriving to investigate?" "Yes. Harrison's known for his integrity. He won't let Edgar's influence sway him." Mrs. Turner sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "But we have to keep Clara safe until he gets here. Edgar's running out of time, and desperate men do desperate things." As if summoned by her words, there was a thunderous pounding on the front door. "Abigail Turner," Edgar's voice boomed from outside. "I know you're harboring my stepdaughter. Send her out now or face charges for kidnapping and harboring a fugitive." Mrs. Turner stood and moved calmly to the door. She didn't open it. "Edgar Crowley, you're drunk or delusional. I'm harboring no one. Now leave my property before I call the deputy." "The deputy is with me," Edgar shouted, "along with a warrant to search these premises." Mrs. Turner's eyes met Clara's across the room. In that moment, Clara saw the decision forming. They could run, hide, delay. But Edgar would keep coming. He'd tear apart the town looking for her. Other people would get hurt. "No more hiding," Clara said quietly. She moved toward the door before Nathan could stop her. "Clara, don't," he started, but Clara had already opened the door. Edgar stood on the porch with 6 men, including Deputy Webb, who looked deeply uncomfortable with the situation. Edgar's face transformed when he saw Clara, triumph mixing with rage. "There you are, my dear," he said with false warmth. "We've been so worried." "I'm not going with you," Clara said clearly. "And I'm not your dear. You're confused, unwell. These people have filled your head with lies. The only liar here is you, Edgar." Clara's voice rang out strong enough that people on the street were stopping to watch. "Good. Let them watch. Let them hear. You poisoned my mother. You stole my inheritance, and you tried to sell me into marriage to cover your crimes." Edgar's expression darkened. "Deputy, you see how irrational she is, clearly delusional. I insist you take her into custody for her own protection." Deputy Webb shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Crowley, the young lady seems quite lucid to me, and Mrs. Turner is a respected member of this community. Without clear evidence of danger, I have a doctor's statement declaring her incompetent." "A doctor who never examined me," Clara shot back. "A doctor who wrote that statement based on your lies." "You ungrateful, hysterical—" Edgar started forward, hand raised. Nathan stepped between them, his presence suddenly dangerous despite his quiet demeanor. "You don't want to finish that movement," he said softly. Edgar froze, apparently recognizing something in Nathan's eyes that gave him pause. He lowered his hand and turned back to the deputy. Marcus, are you going to enforce the law or not? Deputy Webb looked between Edgar and Clara, clearly torn between family loyalty and his sense of justice. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Crowley, I've reviewed the commitment petition you filed. To proceed, we need a proper hearing with the subject present and able to defend herself. That hearing can't happen until the acting magistrate, which is me, has reviewed all documentation and provided proper notice to all parties. That process takes a minimum of 72 hours according to territorial law. This is ridiculous, Edgar exploded. I'm her legal guardian. I have the authority. The law is the law, sir, Webb said firmly. And I'm not going to violate it, not even for family. Miss Whitmore will remain free pending a proper hearing. If you have concerns about her safety or whereabouts, I can place her in protective custody at Mrs. Turner's boarding house under my official supervision. It was a brilliant compromise, Clara realized. Webb was essentially making Mrs. Turner's boarding house an unofficial jail, which satisfied the legal requirement while keeping Clara safe from Edgar. I agree to those terms, Clara said quickly. Edgar's face was purple with fury. You're making a mistake, Marcus. She's dangerous, unstable. Then that will be determined at the hearing in 3 days. Webb's tone left no room for argument. Until then, Miss Whitmore stays at the boarding house. You or your men try to remove her by force, and I'll arrest you for kidnapping. Edgar stared at his nephew with naked hatred, then turned that hatred on Clara. You think you've won, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. You think these people can protect you, but in 3 days, you'll stand in front of a judge and everyone will see you for the hysterical, lying child you are. And then I'll have you committed or married or both. Your mother couldn't stop me and neither can you. We'll see, Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Edgar turned on his heel and stalked away, his men following. Only when they disappeared into the darkness did Clara allow herself to tremble. Nathan's hand on her shoulder steadied her. You did good, he said quietly. That took courage. I was terrified, Clara admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He guided her back inside where Mrs. Turner was already pouring whiskey into 3 glasses. To buying time, Mrs. Turner said, raising her glass, and to Judge Harrison's timely arrival. They drank, the whiskey burning warmth through Clara's chest. 3 days, she said. We have 3 days to prepare. Then we'd better use them well, Mrs. Turner replied. Tomorrow we organize every piece of evidence. We prepare your testimony. We find witnesses who will speak against Edgar despite their fear. And we build a case so strong that no magistrate, no matter how biased, can ignore it. Clara looked at the letters in her hand, her mother's final weapon. 3 days until she'd face Edgar in a courtroom. 3 days until the truth would finally have its chance. She'd come this far through storm and fear and desperate flight. She could last 3 more days. She had to. The alternative was unthinkable. The next morning arrived with unseasonable heat, the kind that made the air shimmer and tempers run short. Clara woke early, her mind already churning through everything that needed to be done. 2 days until Judge Harrison arrived. 2 days to build an unshakable case. Mrs. Turner was already in the dining room when Clara emerged, surrounded by papers spread across every available surface. The journal, the letters, pages of notes in Mrs. Turner's precise handwriting. Can't sleep either? Mrs. Turner asked without looking up. Too much to think about. Clara poured herself coffee and studied the organized chaos. What are you working on? A timeline. Every theft, every forgery, every suspicious transaction we can document. Mrs. Turner tapped a page filled with dates and numbers. Edgar's been careful, but he's also been greedy. Greed makes people sloppy. Look here. She pointed to an entry from June 1873, just a month after Clara's mother died. Edgar sold a parcel of your mother's land for $800, but according to the county records I had Tommy pull from the courthouse, that same land was assessed at $1,500. Where did the other $700 go? Edgar's pocket, Clara said bitterly. Exactly, and that's just one transaction. Over 2 years there are dozens like it. Small enough individually that no one questioned them, but added together they paint a picture of systematic theft. Mrs. Turner looked up, her eyes fierce. "We can prove Edgar's been stealing from you, Clara. That alone might be enough to invalidate his guardianship." "But it doesn't prove he killed my mother," Clara said quietly. "No, that's harder." Mrs. Turner sat back, frustration evident. "The journal and letters establish your mother's suspicions, but suspicion isn't proof. Unless we can find the doctor who treated her and get him to admit something was wrong, or find evidence of Edgar purchasing arsenic." "The apothecary," Clara interrupted. "Mr. Pemberton, in town. Mother used to get her medicines there. If Edgar bought arsenic, Mr. Pemberton would have records. Would he have kept them this long? He keeps everything. Mother used to joke about his filing system, 20 years of receipts and prescriptions, all organized by date." Clara felt hope rising. If Edgar bought arsenic anywhere near the time Mother got sick, there would be a record. Mrs. Turner was already standing. "I'll go this morning. Pemberton knows me. I get my headache powders from him. I'll ask to see his records from 1873, say I'm trying to reconstruct some household accounts." "Edgar might have thought of that already," Nathan said from the doorway. Neither woman had heard him enter. "Might have destroyed any evidence." "Then we'll know he's guilty," Mrs. Turner replied. "Innocent men don't destroy evidence." Nathan moved into the room, looking like he hadn't slept much either. "While you're doing that, I'm going to talk to some people. Edgar's ranch hands, the house servants. Someone knows something. Maybe they saw Edgar with poison or heard him say something incriminating." "Those people work for Edgar," Clara said. "They won't talk against him." "Some of them might. Fear of losing a job is powerful, but so is a guilty conscience." Nathan accepted the coffee Mrs. Turner poured him. "And there's one person who definitely knows more than she's saying, Edgar's housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway. She was there the whole time your mother was sick. If Edgar was poisoning your mother's tea, Mrs. Calloway would have seen him preparing it." Claire remembered Mrs. Calloway, a stern, efficient woman who'd worked for Edgar since before he married Clara's mother. She'd always seemed disapproving of Clara, but not actively cruel. "She won't betray Edgar," Clara said. "She's loyal to him." "Maybe. Or maybe she's just scared." Nathan set down his cup. "Worth trying anyway." The morning passed in tense activity. Mrs. Turner left for the apothecary while Nathan rode out to Edgar's ranch. Clara remained at the boarding house, organizing evidence and preparing her testimony with help from Mrs. Turner's other boarders, 2 widows and a schoolteacher who'd all taken Clara's side with fierce protectiveness. Around noon, Mrs. Turner returned with a grim expression. "The records are gone," she announced. "Pemberton confirmed he sold arsenic to someone in March of 1873, but the page with the purchaser's name has been torn out. He's distraught, says his records have never been tampered with before." "Edgar got there first," Clara said, her heart sinking. "Seems like it. But here's the interesting part. Pemberton remembers the sale. Says it was unusual because the buyer wanted a large quantity, claimed it was for killing rats in a barn. Pemberton was suspicious enough to note it in his personal diary." Mrs. Turner's eyes gleamed. "He's going to check that diary and let me know if he wrote down a name." Hope flickered again. "When will he know?" "This evening. He keeps his old diaries at home." Mrs. Turner removed her bonnet and set it aside. "Any word from Nathan?" "Not yet. They spent the afternoon refining their case, anticipating Edgar's arguments and preparing counter-arguments. Clara practiced her testimony until the words felt natural instead of rehearsed. She needed to sound credible, composed, not like the hysterical girl Edgar would paint her as. As the sun began its descent, Nathan returned. His expression was troubled. "I talked to 3 of Edgar's ranch hands and 2 house servants," he said without preamble. "They all gave me the same story. Clara's unstable, has been since her mother died. Edgar's been patient and kind, but she's become impossible to manage. They're clearly repeating what Edgar told them to say." "Did you talk to Mrs. Calloway?" Clara asked. "Tried. She wouldn't see me. Had one of the servants turn me away at the door." Nathan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But I did talk to someone useful, the gardener, old man named Joseph. He's been on that property for 30 years, worked for Clara's father before Edgar ever showed up." "What did Joseph say?" Mrs. Turner asked. "He remembers Clara's mother getting sick. Says she was healthy one day, then suddenly couldn't keep food down. He noticed that every time Edgar returned from a business trip, Mrs. Whitmore got worse. When Edgar was away, she'd improve. Nathan paused. Joseph also said something else. About 2 weeks before she died, Clara's mother asked him to destroy some tea, said it tasted wrong, made her feel terrible. Joseph poured it out in the garden. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Did he tell anyone? No, figured it wasn't his business. But here's the thing. A week later, Joseph noticed all the plants where he'd poured the tea were dead, brown and withered like they'd been burned. Arsenic, Mrs. Turner breathed. It would do that to plants. Joseph still has that section of garden marked off, says nothing will grow there even now, 2 years later. Nathan looked at Clara. He'll testify to that if you need him. He will? Clara was surprised. Why would he risk his job? Because he liked your mother, said she was kind to him, treated him like a person instead of just a servant. And he said, Nathan's voice gentled, that he's felt guilty ever since she died, wondering if he should have said something about the tea. Clara felt tears building. Her mother had inspired loyalty even in people Edgar thought he controlled. That loyalty might be what saved Clara now. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Turner answered it to find Mr. Pemberton, the apothecary, standing on the porch with a small book in his hands. Mrs. Turner, I found it, he said urgently. The diary entry from March 1873. You need to see this. They ushered him inside. Pemberton opened the diary to a marked page and read aloud. March 12th, 1873. Sold 2 pounds of arsenic trioxide today to Edgar Crowley. He claimed it was for rat poison on his property. The quantity seemed excessive for that purpose. Made note of the sale in case there are questions later. EC was insistent about privacy, paid extra for discretion. Something about the transaction made me uneasy. The room fell silent. This is it, Mrs. Turner said quietly. This connects Edgar directly to arsenic purchase just weeks before Clara's mother showed symptoms of poisoning. Will you testify to this? Nathan asked Pemberton. The apothecary hesitated, fear evident in his face. Edgar Crowley is a powerful man. If I testify against him and he's acquitted? He won't be acquitted, Mrs. Turner said firmly. Not with this evidence, not with Judge Harrison presiding. Edgar's days of intimidating people are over. I need to think about it, Pemberton said. My business, my family. I need to consider the risks. Of course, Clara said, though disappointment weighed on her. Thank you for bringing this to us. Even if you can't testify, knowing the truth helps. After Pemberton left, the three of them sat in heavy silence. He's scared, Nathan said. Can't blame him. No, but we need him, Mrs. Turner replied. His testimony combined with the diary entry, the journal, the letters, Joseph's story about the garden, it all builds a picture. But without Pemberton on the stand confirming he sold arsenic to Edgar, the defense can dismiss it as circumstantial. Clara stood and moved to the window, watching the street. Somewhere out there, Edgar was preparing his own case, building his own narrative. He had money, lawyers, influence. What did she have? A journal, some letters, and the fragile courage of a few people willing to stand against him. It didn't feel like enough. I should testify about the tea, Clara said suddenly. You already planned to, Mrs. Turner replied. No, I mean about the specific incidents. The times Mother refused Edgar's tea and felt better. The times he insisted she drink it and got worse. I was there for some of those. I saw it happen. Clara turned to face them. I didn't understand what I was seeing then, but I remember. Mother would push the tea away, and Edgar would get this look, frustrated, almost angry. Then he'd sweet-talk her into drinking it, and within hours she'd be in agony. Edgar's lawyers will say you're fabricating memories, seeing patterns that weren't there, Mrs. Turner warned. Let them try. I know what I saw. Clara's voice was steel. And if telling the truth means standing up in court and calling Edgar a murderer to his face, then that's what I'll do. Nathan looked at her with something like pride. You've changed, he said quietly, from the terrified girl who knocked on my door 3 nights ago. I haven't changed, Clara replied. I just stopped pretending to be what Edgar wanted me to be. This is who I always was underneath. I just forgot for a while. A knock interrupted them, sharp, authoritative. Mrs. Turner opened the door to find Deputy Webb standing there, looking uncomfortable. Miss Whitmore, he said formally, I need to inform you that Mr. Crowley has filed additional charges. He's claiming you stole property from his home, specifically a journal and jewelry belonging to your late mother. Clara's stomach dropped. Of course Edgar had noticed they were missing. Of course he'd used their absence as another weapon. Those items belong to my mother, not Edgar, Clara said. I have every right to them. That's a matter for the court to decide. In the meantime, Mr. Crowley is demanding they be returned to his custody pending the hearing. Webb's expression was apologetic. I have to ask you to turn them over. No, Mrs. Turner said flatly. Those items are evidence in a potential criminal case. They stay in protective custody. Mrs. Turner, Deputy Webb, let me be very clear. If you confiscate that evidence and return it to the accused party, you'll be interfering with a federal investigation. Mrs. Turner's voice was calm but absolute. Judge Harrison is arriving tomorrow specifically to review allegations against Edgar Crowley. If he arrives to find you've handed critical evidence to the man being investigated, your career will be over before it's properly begun. Webb went pale. Federal investigation? I wasn't informed. Now you are. Harrison's telegram arrived this afternoon. Mrs. Turner produced the paper. He's conducting a preliminary investigation into allegations of theft, fraud, and potentially murder. The evidence currently in my possession is central to that investigation. You want to explain to a federal judge why you gave it back to the suspect? Webb read the telegram, his face growing more worried with each word. This complicates things. Only if you let Edgar push you into bad decisions, Nathan said. You're a good lawman, Marcus. Don't let family loyalty make you compromise your integrity. The deputy was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with conflicting loyalties. Finally, he spoke. The evidence stays with Mrs. Turner, but I'll need a full accounting of what you have, and it needs to be secured in a way that Edgar can't claim it's been tampered with. Agreed, Mrs. Turner said. I'll prepare an inventory immediately. Webb nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Miss Whitmore, I want you to know I'm not blind. I've seen how Edgar operates, the way he controls people. And I remember your mother. She was a good woman. She didn't deserve what happened to her. Thank you, Clara said quietly. After Webb left, Mrs. Turner began preparing the formal evidence inventory. Clara helped, cataloging every page of the journal, every letter, every piece of jewelry recovered from the vanity. It was meticulous, careful work, and necessary. Edgar would challenge everything, claim tampering or forgery. They needed their chain of custody to be unimpeachable. As night fell, Nathan stood watch at the window while Clara and Mrs. Turner worked. The boarding house was quiet, most of the other guests already retired. Outside, Fort Kearney settled into evening routines. Saloons filling with noise, respectable homes going dark, the whole town breathing its nightly rhythm. Clara was sealing the evidence inventory when Mrs. Turner suddenly looked up. Someone's coming, she said. Multiple riders. Nathan was already moving, his hand on his gun. How many? 4, maybe 5. Moving fast. Clara's heart raced. Edgar. Who else? Mrs. Turner quickly gathered the evidence and moved it to a locked strongbox. Nathan, the back door. I'm not running, Clara interrupted. She stood, her hands steady despite her fear. Whatever Edgar's planning, running just delays it. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of hiding. Clara, Nathan started. The front door burst open with a crash of splintering wood. Edgar strode in with 4 men, all armed. His face was twisted with rage. Where is she? He demanded. Where is my lying, thieving stepdaughter? Mrs. Turner stepped between Edgar and Clara. You just broke into my home, Edgar Crowley. That's a crime, regardless of your grievances. Get out of my way, Abigail. This is between me and Clara. Edgar's eyes found Clara across the room. You've caused enough trouble, girl. This ends now. You're coming home and you're going to sign papers transferring everything to me, or I'll make you wish you'd died with your mother. The threat hung in the air, naked and vicious. There it is, Clara said, her voice surprisingly calm. The real Edgar. No more pretending to be the concerned guardian, just threats and violence, like always. You have no idea what you've cost me, Edgar shouted. 2 years of planning, thousands of dollars in arrangements, alliances carefully built, and you destroy it all with your melodramatic flight and ridiculous accusations. Melodramatic? Clara's voice rose. "You poisoned my mother. You stole my inheritance. You tried to sell me to James Rutherford like I was livestock. Your mother was weak, and your inheritance was wasted on a frivolous girl who wouldn't know how to manage it." Edgar took a step forward. "I built that estate into something valuable. I made the hard decisions. And yes, your mother became inconvenient, always questioning, always interfering, so I dealt with her, just like I'm going to deal with you." The confession hung in the air, stark and damning. "Did you hear that?" Mrs. Turner called toward the kitchen. Deputy Webb emerged from the shadows where he'd been waiting, his face grave. Behind him came two other men, federal marshals, their badges glinting in the lamplight. Edgar froze, realization dawning. "You set me up," he breathed. "You confessed," Clara corrected, "to murder, to theft, to conspiracy. We just made sure there were witnesses." The marshals moved forward. "Edgar Crowley, you're under arrest for the murder of Beatrice Whitmore, fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." Edgar's men stepped back, clearly unwilling to interfere with federal officers. Edgar himself seemed to deflate, the rage draining out of him as the reality of his situation became clear. "You can't prove any of this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We can, actually," Mrs. Turner said. She opened the strongbox and pulled out the journal. "Your wife documented everything, the poisoning, the theft, all of it. We also have purchase records showing you bought arsenic weeks before she fell ill, testimony from witnesses who saw the effects of that poison, and letters she wrote to federal authorities before she died." "And now we have your confession," Deputy Webb added, "witnessed by federal marshals and recorded by a court stenographer." Only then did Clara notice the woman sitting quietly in the corner, her fingers still moving across her stenography machine, capturing every word. Edgar stared at the assembled evidence, at the marshals closing in, at Clara standing tall and unafraid. Something in his expression shifted, defeat mixing with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. "You were always trouble," he said to Clara, "just like your mother. Never knew your place, never accepted what was best for you. If you'd just been obedient, none of this would have been necessary. If I'd been obedient, you would have stolen everything, and I'd have been trapped in a marriage to a man I didn't choose, spending my whole life as property." Clara's voice was steady. "So no, Edgar, I won't apologize for fighting back. I won't apologize for refusing to be owned." The marshals took Edgar by the arms. He didn't resist, but his eyes never left Clara's face. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Clara replied. "It is." They led him out into the night, his men following in stunned silence. The broken door swung open behind them, letting in cool evening air. Clara stood in the wreckage of Mrs. Turner's parlor, surrounded by people who'd believed her, who'd fought for her. Nathan, Mrs. Turner, Deputy Webb, the federal marshals who'd arrived just hours before on Judge Harrison's orders. The stenographer who'd captured every damning word. "Is it really over?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. "The arrest is made," one of the marshals said, "but there will still be a trial. Edgar has money and lawyers. He'll fight this." "Let him fight," Mrs. Turner said. "We have evidence, witnesses, and a full confession witnessed by federal officers. Edgar Crowley's reign of terror is finished." Clara felt her legs suddenly weaken. Nathan caught her elbow, steadying her. "You should sit down," he said gently. "You've been running on nerves and courage for days. Let yourself rest." Clara sank into a chair, and suddenly the enormity of everything hit her. Her mother was dead, poisoned by a man she'd trusted. Clara's inheritance had been systematically stolen. She'd spent 2 years under Edgar's control, believing she had no options, no power, no choices. But she'd escaped. She'd fought back. She'd found people who believed her and helped her. And Edgar was in custody, his crimes exposed, his power broken. "I need to testify," Clara said, "at the trial. I need to tell them everything." "You will?" Mrs. Turner assured her. "Judge Harrison arrives tomorrow. He'll conduct a preliminary hearing, review all the evidence, and likely remand Edgar to custody pending trial. You'll have your day in court, Clara. You'll have your chance to speak truth." "Will it be enough?" Clara asked. "Even with the confession, even with all the evidence, Edgar has influence. What if the jury doesn't believe us?" "Then we appeal," We take it to higher courts. We fight until justice is served. Mrs. Turner's voice was firm. But I don't think it'll come to that. Harrison is known for his fairness and his hatred of men who abuse power. With him presiding, Edgar won't be able to buy his way out. Deputy Webb cleared his throat awkwardly. Miss Whitmore, I owe you an apology. I should have looked deeper into Edgar's claims, should have questioned his version of events. I let family loyalty cloud my judgment. You helped in the end, Clara said. That's what matters. Still, I'm sorry. Webb looked at the broken door. I'll get a carpenter here first thing in the morning to fix this, and I'll make sure Edgar stays in custody. No bail, no visitors, except his lawyer. After the marshals and Webb left, Clara, Nathan, and Mrs. Turner were alone in the quiet boarding house. You did it, Nathan said to Clara. You stood up to him, faced him down without flinching. I was terrified, Clara admitted. But you did it anyway. That's what courage looks like. He smiled at her. Your mother would be proud. Clara felt tears building, but these were different from the grief and fear she'd cried before. These were tears of relief, of vindication, of the beginning of healing. What happens now? She asked. Now? Mrs. Turner poured them each a measure of whiskey. Now you rest. Tomorrow, Judge Harrison arrives and the legal proceedings begin. It'll be tedious and probably painful. Trials always are. But you'll get through it. And after the trial? Mrs. Turner and Nathan exchanged glances. After the trial, you reclaim your life, Mrs. Turner said. Your inheritance, your property, your future. You make your own choices about what you want and who you want to be. Clara looked at them, these people who'd risked so much to help her. Mrs. Turner with her fierce protectiveness and tactical brilliance. Nathan with his quiet strength and unwavering support. Joseph the gardener who'd kept his guilt for 2 years and finally found the courage to speak. Mr. Pemberton who'd overcome his fear to provide crucial evidence. Even Deputy Webb who'd chosen justice over family loyalty. I couldn't have done this alone, Clara said. You didn't have to, Nathan replied. That's what people who care about justice do. We stand together. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking whiskey and watching the night deepen outside. Somewhere in a cell, Edgar Crowley was learning what it felt like to be powerless. Tomorrow, the formal machinery of justice would begin to turn. There would be hearings and testimony, lawyers and arguments, the slow grinding process of truth being established in a court of law. But tonight, Clara allowed herself to simply exist without fear for the first time in 2 years. No Edgar controlling her movements, no forced marriage looming, no threats or manipulation or gaslighting, just freedom, fragile and new, carefully protected by people who understood its value. Thank you, Clara said quietly. Both of you, for everything. You saved yourself, Mrs. Turner replied. We just helped clear the path. Still, thank you. They finished their whiskey and eventually retired to their respective rooms. Clara lay in the narrow bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the boarding house settling. Outside, Fort Kearney breathed its nightly rhythm. Dogs barking, distant voices, the wind across the prairie. Tomorrow would bring Judge Harrison and the beginning of the legal battle. There would be challenges ahead, setbacks probably, moments of doubt and fear. Edgar wouldn't go quietly, and his lawyers would attack Clara's credibility, her memory, her motives. But she'd faced Edgar tonight and hadn't flinched. She'd stood her ground while he threatened and raged. And when he'd confessed, when he'd finally revealed the monster beneath the respectable mask, she'd been ready with witnesses and evidence and the full weight of the law. Clara closed her eyes and felt her mother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. The journal, the letters, the hidden jewelry, all of it had been her mother's final gift. Weapons left for Clara to use when she was ready, when she was strong enough to fight. I did it, Mother, Clara whispered into the darkness. I fought back, just like you wanted me to. The wind answered, rattling the window gently. And for the first time since her mother's death, Clara felt at peace. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, safe in the knowledge that morning would bring not fear, but the next step toward justice. The fight wasn't over, but the worst of it was behind her. And whatever came next, Clara would face it standing tall, unafraid, and finally, completely free to make her own choices. Judge Thomas Harrison arrived on the noon stage, a tall man with iron gray hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense to truth. Clara watched from Mrs. Turner's window as he stepped down from the coach, his bearing commanding immediate respect. This was the man her mother had tried to reach, had trusted with her final desperate plea for help. Mrs. Turner stood beside Clara, her hand resting gently on the younger woman's shoulder. "He's a fair man," she said quietly. "Hard, but fair. If anyone can see justice done, it's Harrison." Within an hour, the judge had established himself in the fort's administrative building and sent word that he would conduct preliminary hearings starting that afternoon. Edgar's lawyers arrived on the same stage, two men from Omaha in expensive suits, already preparing their defense with practiced efficiency. Clara dressed carefully in a simple gray dress Mrs. Turner had lent her, appropriate for mourning and for testifying. Her hand shook as she fastened the buttons, but her resolve held steady. She'd come too far to falter now. Nathan knocked softly on her door. "It's time," he said. "Are you ready?" "No," Clara admitted, "but let's go anyway." The hearing room was packed. It seemed half of Fort Kearney had turned out, drawn by the spectacle of Edgar Crowley's fall from grace. Clara felt their eyes on her as she entered, some sympathetic, some curious, some openly skeptical. She kept her head high and her gaze forward. Edgar sat at the defendant's table between his lawyers, his wrists shackled. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his freedom and authority. But when his eyes met Clara's, the hatred there was undiminished. She met his gaze steadily until he looked away first. Judge Harrison called the room to order with a single rap of his gavel. The crowd fell silent immediately. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial on charges of murder, fraud, theft, and conspiracy," Harrison said, his voice carrying clearly. "This is not the trial itself. We are here to establish probable cause, nothing more. Is that understood?" Everyone nodded. "Good. I'll hear from the prosecution first. Deputy Webb?" Webb stood and presented the basic facts of the case: Clara's mother's death, Edgar's guardianship, the allegations of poisoning and theft, Clara's flight, and Edgar's pursuit. He outlined the evidence methodically: the journal, the letters, the arsenic purchase, the testimony of witnesses. Edgar's lead lawyer, a man named Silas Blackwood, objected repeatedly. "Your Honor, we're being asked to accept the ravings of a dead woman and the accusations of a known hysteric. There's no solid evidence here, only speculation and hearsay." "I'll determine what constitutes evidence, Mr. Blackwood," Harrison said dryly. "Continue, Deputy Webb." When Webb finished, Harrison called Clara to testify. She stood on legs that felt uncertain but carried her forward anyway. The oath she swore felt heavy with significance, to tell the truth. The whole truth, so help her. "Miss Whitmore," Harrison said, his tone gentler than she'd expected. "I knew your mother, though not well. We corresponded occasionally on matters of property law. She struck me as an intelligent and capable woman." "She was," Clara said, her voice steady. "Tell me about the last months of her life." Clara took a breath and began. She described her mother's illness in detail: the sudden onset, the progressive wasting, the agonizing pain. She spoke about Edgar's constant presence, his insistence on preparing her mother's tea personally, the pattern of improvement when he was away and decline when he returned. "Your mother's own words support this," Harrison said, gesturing to the journal. "She believed she was being poisoned." "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Blackwood, your witness." Edgar's lawyer stood and approached Clara with the predatory confidence of a man who knew how to destroy credibility. "Miss Whitmore, you were 17 when your mother died, were you not?" "Yes." "A difficult age, emotional, prone to dramatic interpretation of events." Blackwood's tone was condescending. "Isn't it possible that in your grief you've constructed a narrative that makes sense of a tragedy that was simply natural illness?" "No," Clara said firmly. "It's not possible. I know what I saw." "Oh, do you? Because according to the servants in Mr. Crowley's household, you spent most of those months in your room, avoiding your mother's sickbed. They say you couldn't bear to see her suffering." The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. Clara had avoided her mother's room sometimes, unable to bear the screams of pain, the smell of sickness. Guilt had haunted her ever since. "I was scared," Clara admitted. "Watching my mother die was the hardest thing I've ever experienced, but that doesn't mean I didn't see what was happening. Edgar controlled access to her room, controlled her medicine, controlled everything. And every time I did visit, I saw the pattern, his special tea, her worsening symptoms. Or perhaps you saw your mother's husband trying desperately to help his dying wife, and you've reframed those memories to match your current accusations." Blackwood's voice was smooth, reasonable. "Isn't it true that you've been diagnosed with hysteria and emotional instability?" "By doctors Edgar paid to write those diagnoses, yes," Clara shot back. "Doctors who never examined me, who based their opinions entirely on Edgar's descriptions. I notice none of them are here to testify." A murmur ran through the crowd. Blackwood frowned. "Isn't it also true that you fled your guardian's home in the middle of the night, demonstrating exactly the kind of irrational behavior that concerned him?" "I fled because Edgar was forcing me into a marriage I didn't want. Because he'd stolen my inheritance and was planning to have me declared incompetent so he could keep it. That's not irrational. That's self-preservation. A marriage to a respectable young man of good family. Most young ladies would be grateful for such an arrangement." Clara felt anger rising but kept her voice level. "I'm not most young ladies, and I don't require a man to arrange my life for me like I'm a piece of furniture being placed in the right room." The courtroom rippled with reaction, some approving, some shocked. Judge Harrison's mouth twitched, though whether in amusement or disapproval, Clara couldn't tell. Blackwood changed tactics. "This journal you've produced, how do we know it's authentic? It could have been written by anyone, at any time." "The handwriting has been verified by 3 people who knew my mother well," Mrs. Turner called from the gallery, "including me. That's Beatrice Whitmore's hand, no question." "And the letters?" Blackwood pressed. "Convenient that they were hidden away, only to be discovered now." "They were hidden by a dying woman trying to protect her daughter," Clara said, "and they were discovered exactly where she said they'd be, along with jewelry Edgar claimed had been sold, but which he'd actually stolen." Blackwood tried several more angles of attack, but Clara held firm. She'd spent days preparing for this, anticipating every argument, every attempt to undermine her credibility. When he finally sat down, she felt drained but unbroken. Harrison called Joseph the gardener next. The old man testified about the tea he'd poured out, the dead plants that still marked the spot. His testimony was simple and devastating in its clarity. Then Mr. Pemberton took the stand, his diary entry and personal recollection of selling Edgar 2 pounds of arsenic just weeks before Clara's mother fell ill. Blackwood tried to shake his testimony, but Pemberton had records, dates, details that couldn't be disputed. Finally, the stenographer read back Edgar's confession from the previous night. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Edgar's own words condemned him. His admission that Clara's mother had been inconvenient, that he'd dealt with her, that he'd planned and orchestrated everything. Blackwood objected strenuously. That alleged confession was obtained under duress, through entrapment. Mr. Crowley walked into a private residence of his own volition and made those statements freely, Harrison interrupted. The fact that law enforcement was present to hear them doesn't constitute entrapment. Overruled. The preliminary hearing lasted 3 hours. When it concluded, Harrison didn't hesitate. "I find sufficient evidence to bind Edgar Crowley over for trial on all charges. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial, which I'm scheduling for 3 weeks from today." Harrison looked at Edgar with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Crowley, you stand accused of one of the most heinous crimes I've encountered in 20 years on the bench, the calculated murder of your wife through poison, motivated by greed and control. If convicted, you will face the maximum penalty under territorial law. Do you understand?" Edgar finally spoke, his voice hollow. "I understand." "Good. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel fell with finality. Clara felt her legs give out. Nathan caught her, steadying her as the courtroom erupted in conversation. People pressed forward, some offering congratulations, some still skeptical, all wanting to be part of the drama. Mrs. Turner cut through the crowd like a ship through waves. "Come on, let's get you out of here." They escaped through a side door and returned to the boarding house. Claire collapsed into a chair, exhausted beyond words. The hearing had been brutal, Blackwood's attacks vicious. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd held her ground. "You did well," Mrs. Turner said, bringing tea. "Very well." Harrison was impressed, I could tell. "Will it be enough?" Clara asked. "At the actual trial? With the evidence we have?" "Yes, but these next 3 weeks won't be easy. Edgar's lawyers will dig deeper, find every possible angle of attack, and you'll have to testify again, probably for much longer." Clara nodded wearily. 3 more weeks of waiting, of preparing, of living in limbo while Edgar sat in a cell plotting his defense. Nathan had been quiet since they returned. Now he spoke. "What will you do? After the trial, I mean." Clara looked at him in surprise. She'd been so focused on surviving the legal battle that she hadn't thought much about what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose I'll reclaim the estate, try to rebuild what Edgar destroyed." "Will you stay here, in Fort Kearney?" "I haven't decided. The house where my mother died, where Edgar controlled me for 2 years. I'm not sure I can live there again." Clara stared into her tea. "Maybe I'll sell it. Start fresh somewhere new." "Where would you go?" Mrs. Turner asked. "I don't know. Somewhere I can make my own choices, live my own life. Maybe one of those places Nathan mentioned, California or Oregon. Somewhere the past doesn't follow quite so close." The days that followed settled into a strange routine. Clara helped Mrs. Turner with the boarding house, finding comfort in simple domestic tasks after so much turmoil. She walked the streets of Fort Kearney freely, no longer hiding, though people still stared and whispered. Some offered support, others judgment, most simply curiosity. Nathan stayed close, ostensibly to provide protection, but Clara suspected also because he'd grown accustomed to their strange partnership. They talked for hours about his sister Emily, about Clara's plans for the future, about the nature of freedom and choice, and what it meant to truly own your own life. "You could come with me," Clara said one evening. They were sitting on Mrs. Turner's porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie golden red. "If I go west, I mean. You said you like new territory." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Are you asking me to come as protection, or as something else?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't look away. "I'm not sure yet, but I know I don't want to say goodbye to you when this is over. You're important to me, Nathan. You gave me choices when everyone else gave me commands. You believed me when it would have been easier to turn me away. That matters. You matter to me too," Nathan said quietly. "But I won't make assumptions about what that means. When the trial's over, when you're truly free to choose your own path, ask me then. I'll answer honestly. And what if my choice is you? Then I'll be honored." He smiled, his expression soft in the fading light. "But make sure it's really your choice, Clara. Not gratitude, not fear of being alone. Choose because you want to, not because you feel you should." It was the most Nathan thing he could have said, still giving her agency, still refusing to pressure or assume. Clara found herself falling a little bit in love with him right then, though she kept that thought to herself. He was right. She needed to know her own mind first, needed to stand on her own before she could truly choose to stand beside someone else. The 3 weeks passed slowly. Mrs. Turner helped Clara prepare her testimony, practicing answers to every possible question. They organized the evidence obsessively, building an airtight case. Catherine Wells, the lawyer Mrs. Turner had contacted, arrived from Lincoln and joined their preparations. She was sharp-minded and fierce, exactly what Clara needed. "Edgar's lawyers will try to make this about your character rather than his actions," Wells warned. "They'll paint you as ungrateful, hysterical, possibly immoral. They'll suggest Nathan is your lover, and this whole thing is a scheme to steal your stepfather's property." "Let them try," Clara said. She'd been through Edgar's manipulations for 2 years. She could handle his lawyers for a few days. The trial began on a bright September morning. The courtroom was even more packed than the preliminary hearing, people standing in the back and crowding the doorway. This was the main event, the full reckoning. Edgar looked thinner, harder after 3 weeks in custody. His expensive suit couldn't hide the shadows under his eyes or the bitter set to his mouth. He stared at Clara with undisguised loathing. Judge Harrison gavelled the court to order. "We're here to determine the guilt or innocence of Edgar Crowley on charges of murder in the first degree, multiple counts of fraud and theft, and conspiracy." The prosecution may begin. Catherine Wells stood and delivered an opening statement that was surgical in its precision. She laid out the timeline of events, the pattern of poisoning, the financial crimes, the forced marriage scheme. She promised to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Edgar Crowley had murdered his wife for her money and attempted to do the same to her daughter through legal means. Blackwood's opening was equally powerful, painting Edgar as a devoted husband and guardian driven to desperate measures by Clara's instability. He suggested the arsenic had been purchased for legitimate purposes, that Clara's mother had died of natural illness, and that Clara herself was either delusional or engaged in a calculated scheme to steal from her stepfather. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution called witness after witness: Joseph the gardener, Mr. Pemberton the apothecary, Mrs. Turner, Nathan, several of Clara's mother's friends who testified about Beatrice's intelligence and Edgar's controlling behavior. The doctor who'd signed the death certificate was recalled and forced to admit he'd never tested for poisoning, had simply accepted Edgar's account of the illness. Clara testified for 6 hours across 2 days. Blackwood attacked relentlessly, but she held firm. Every answer was careful, considered, truthful. She didn't exaggerate or embellish. She simply told what she'd seen, what she'd experienced, what she knew to be true. The journal and letters were entered into evidence. Wells had experts verify the handwriting, the dates, the authenticity of every detail. Edgar's purchase of arsenic was documented with receipts and testimony. The dead garden patch was described in detail, along with expert testimony about arsenic's effects on plant life. Then Wells played her final card. She called Mrs. Calloway, Edgar's housekeeper, who'd remained silent throughout the preliminary proceedings. The older woman took the stand reluctantly, her hands twisting in her lap. Under oath, Wells asked her direct questions. "Mrs. Calloway, did you ever see Mr. Crowley prepare tea for his wife personally?" "Yes," she whispered. "Was this unusual?" "Yes. He always insisted on making it himself, wouldn't let anyone else touch it." "Did you ever see what he put in that tea?" Long silence. Mrs. Calloway's eyes found Edgar's face, then looked away. "I saw him add something from a small bottle, white powder. He said it was medicine the doctor prescribed." "Did you believe him?" Mrs. Calloway's voice broke. "I didn't want to believe anything else. He was the master of the house. I needed the position. But after Mrs. Whitmore died, after I saw how quickly he moved on, how he started controlling Clara, I began to wonder. And the wondering has kept me awake every night since." "Why didn't you speak up before?" "Because I was afraid. Because Edgar Crowley is a powerful man and I'm just a housekeeper. Because speaking truth to power can cost you everything." Tears streamed down her face. "But I can't stay silent anymore. That girl deserves justice. Her mother deserves justice." Edgar stood up suddenly, chains rattling. "You lying witch! I gave you employment for 15 years. "Order." Harrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Mr. Crowley, sit down or you'll be removed from this courtroom." Edgar sat, but his composure was cracking. The veneer of the wronged guardian was dissolving, revealing the rage beneath. The prosecution rested. Blackwood called his own witnesses: servants who swore Edgar was devoted, doctors who spoke about Clara's alleged instability, character witnesses who praised Edgar's business acumen and community standing. But it felt hollow after the weight of evidence against him. Edgar himself took the stand, against his lawyer's advice. He denied everything: the poisoning, the theft, the forced marriage. He painted himself as a man trying to do his best in difficult circumstances, betrayed by an ungrateful stepdaughter and lying servants. Wells destroyed him on cross-examination. She walked him through the timeline, forcing him to explain each suspicious transaction, each convenient coincidence. She made him account for the arsenic purchase, for the pattern of his wife's symptoms, for the jewelry he'd claimed was sold, but which had been found hidden in his house. By the time Wells finished, Edgar was sweating, his answers contradictory and defensive. The jury watched him with unconcealed suspicion. Closing arguments came on the 4th day. Blackwood made a passionate plea for reasonable doubt, suggesting that circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to convict, that coincidence wasn't proof of guilt. Wells stood and addressed the jury with quiet intensity. "Edgar Crowley murdered his wife slowly over months, making her suffer every day so he could steal her property and control her daughter. He's a man who sees other human beings as obstacles or resources, nothing more. Beatrice Whitmore was an obstacle, so he removed her. Clara Whitmore was a resource, so he tried to control her. When she escaped his control, he pursued her like a hunter chasing prey. These aren't the actions of a devoted guardian. These are the actions of a predator. And the evidence, the journal, the letters, the arsenic, the confession, the testimony of witnesses, all of it points to one inescapable truth. Edgar Crowley is guilty. Find him so. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Clara waited in Mrs. Turner's boarding house, too anxious to eat or sit still. Nathan stayed close, his presence steady and calming. Mrs. Turner busied herself with practical tasks, but her eyes kept darting to the clock. Finally, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. They returned to the courtroom in the gathering dusk. Lamplight flickered across tense faces. Clara sat between Nathan and Mrs. Turner, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. The foreman stood. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Clara heard nothing over the roaring in her ears. Guilty. They'd found him guilty. On the charges of fraud and theft, the foreman continued, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. Judge Harrison gavelled for order. When silence finally fell, he spoke directly to Edgar. Edgar Crowley, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of crimes that shock the conscience. You murdered your wife through poison, motivated by greed. You stole from your stepdaughter, attempting to control every aspect of her life. You perverted the law to serve your own interests, using your guardianship as a weapon rather than a protection. Harrison paused, letting the weight of the words settle. I hereby sentence you to 20 years of hard labor in the territorial prison. All property stolen from the Whitmore estate is to be returned to Clara Whitmore immediately, along with damages in the amount of $10,000. You are stripped of all guardianship rights and forbidden from any contact with Miss Whitmore for the remainder of your natural life. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell one final time. Edgar was led away in chains, still protesting, still insisting on his innocence, but his voice faded into the distance and was gone. Clara sat frozen, unable to process that it was truly over. It's done, Mrs. Turner said softly. Justice is done. Clara turned to Nathan and found him smiling at her, his eyes bright with pride and something deeper. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him and held on tight. He held her back, steady and warm and real. You did it, he whispered into her hair. You fought and you won. We did it, Clara corrected. I couldn't have without you, without both of you. They stayed like that for a long moment, while the courtroom emptied around them and Fort Kearney's evening sounds drifted through the windows. When Clara finally pulled back, she found Mrs. Turner watching them with an expression of deep satisfaction. What happens now? Clara asked. Now? Mrs. Turner smiled. Now you reclaim your life, child. Every piece of it. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and property transfers. Clara officially took control of her inheritance, discovering that despite Edgar's theft, her mother's estate was still substantial. The land alone was worth over $40,000, and there were investments, stocks, bonds that Edgar hadn't managed to liquidate. Clara's first action was to sell the house where her mother had died. She couldn't bear to live there, couldn't walk those halls without seeing Edgar's shadow. The property sold quickly to a family from St. Louis, and Clara used part of the proceeds to expand Mrs. Turner's boarding house. What's this for? Mrs. Turner asked when Clara presented her with the deed to the adjacent property. For a refuge, Clara said, a place where women like me, women fleeing abuse, women trying to reclaim their lives, can find shelter and help. You've been doing this work for years, Mrs. Turner. Let's make it official. Let's build something that lasts. Mrs. Turner's eyes filled with tears. Your mother would be so proud of you. I hope so. This is her legacy too. She fought Edgar in the only ways available to her, and she left me the tools to finish the fight. Now I want to use those tools to help other women fight their own battles. They christened it the Whitmore House, and within a month it was sheltering 3 women who'd fled situations similar to Clara's. Mrs. Turner ran it with fierce efficiency, providing not just housing but legal assistance, education, and support. Clara funded it all, finding purpose in turning her pain into protection for others. As autumn deepened into winter, Clara made another decision. She sold the remaining property except for a small parcel of land overlooking the Platte River, just outside Fort Kearny. On that land, she commissioned a modest cabin to be built, sturdy, simple, hers. Nathan helped with the construction, his skills as a frontier horseman translating surprisingly well to carpentry. They worked side by side through crisp November days, raising walls and fitting windows. Other people helped too, Joseph the gardener, several of Mrs. Turner's boarders. Even Deputy Webb stopped by to lend a hand. One evening, as the cabin neared completion, Clara and Nathan sat on the partially finished porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. The same prairie where she'd run for her life just months before. Now it felt different, not a place of fear but of possibility. "I've been thinking about your question," Clara said, "from before the trial, about what happens next." Nathan didn't look at her, but she felt his attention sharpen. And I still don't have all the answers. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of Edgar's control, outside of the fight. But I know some things. Clara turned to face him. "I know I want to keep doing this work, helping women, building something that matters. I know I want to stay here, near Mrs. Turner and the Whitmore house. And I know—" She paused, gathering courage. "I know I want you in my life, Nathan Cole. Not because I'm afraid to be alone, not because I owe you something, but because when I imagine my future, you're in it. Because you gave me choices when everyone else gave me commands. Because you're good and kind and you see me as a person instead of property. Because I'm choosing you, freely and without pressure. If you'll have me." Nathan was quiet for so long, Clara's heart started to sink. Then he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I've been waiting for you to be ready to make that choice," he said softly. "Not just about me, but about everything. Your life, your future, who you want to be. And now that you have—" He smiled, his eyes warm in the fading light. "Yes, Clara, I'll have you. I'll stand beside you while you build your refuge and help women find freedom. I'll be your partner in whatever you choose to do, not above you, not controlling you, beside you, as equals." "As equals," Clara repeated, and the words felt like a vow. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell across the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wind whispered through tall grass. The world felt vast and full of possibility. 3 months later, on a brilliant February morning, Clara Whitmore and Nathan Cole stood together on that same porch and spoke their marriage vows. It was a small ceremony. Mrs. Turner, Deputy Webb, Joseph the gardener, a handful of women from the Whitmore house, and Judge Harrison, who'd agreed to officiate. There was no giving away, no transfer of ownership from father to husband. Clara walked to Nathan of her own accord, an equal choosing an equal. The vows they spoke were simple but powerful, promises of partnership, respect, and mutual support. "Do you, Clara, take Nathan as your husband, to stand beside in freedom and choice?" "I do." "Do you, Nathan, take Clara as your wife to honor her choices and support her path?" "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you partners in marriage. You may seal this union with a kiss." Nathan cupped Clara's face gently and kissed her, and Clara kissed him back, feeling joy bubble up bright and unexpected. When they pulled apart, the small gathering erupted in applause. Mrs. Turner was crying openly. "Your mother would be so happy," she said, pulling Clara into a fierce embrace. "So very happy." The celebration was simple, a meal at the Whitmore house, shared among friends who'd become family. Clara looked around the table at the faces of people who'd believed her, fought for her, helped her reclaim her life. This was what freedom looked like, not just the absence of control, but the presence of choice, community, purpose. As evening fell and guests began to depart, Nathan and Clara returned to their cabin. It was truly finished now, furnished simply but comfortably. Their home, built with their own hands, belonging to no one but themselves. Nathan lit a fire while Clara moved through the small space, touching familiar objects, the books on the shelf, the quilt Mrs. Turner had made them. The simple furniture they'd chosen together. Everything here was a choice freely made. Happy? Nathan asked, coming to stand behind her. Clara leaned back against him, feeling his arms come around her waist. Through the window, she could see the prairie stretching endlessly under starlight. The same prairie where she'd run in terror, where she'd fought for survival, where she'd learned to choose freedom over safety. Yes, she said, I'm happy. And she was. The nightmares came less frequently now. The fear that had gripped her for so long was fading, replaced by something stronger, confidence, purpose, the knowledge that she could face hardship and emerge intact. Edgar was in prison, his power broken. The women at the Whitmore house were finding their own paths to freedom, and Clara herself was building a life entirely of her own choosing, a life that honored her mother's sacrifice while forging something new. What are you thinking about? Nathan asked. About choices, Clara said. About how I spent so long believing I didn't have any, and then discovered I'd had them all along. I just needed to be brave enough to make them. You're the bravest person I know, Nathan said quietly. Clara turned in his arms to face him. I'm not brave, I'm just stubborn. I refuse to accept the life Edgar planned for me, even when accepting it would have been easier. That's what bravery is, doing the hard thing because it's right, even when the easy thing is right there. Nathan smiled. And I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to knock on my door that night. Best decision I ever made, Clara said, and kissed him. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth while the fire crackled and the prairie wind sang its ancient song. Outside, the land stretched vast and free under stars that had witnessed everything. Her mother's death, Clara's flight, the long fight for justice, and now this moment of peace. Years later, when people asked Clara about those dark days, about Edgar and the trial, and the fight for her freedom, she always told them the same thing. Freedom wasn't something given. It was something claimed. It was a choice made daily, in small ways and large. It was standing up when it would be easier to stay down. It was speaking truth when lies would be safer. It was refusing to be owned, controlled, or diminished. The Whitmore house grew and thrived, helping hundreds of women over the years. Clara ran it with the same fierce determination she'd used to defeat Edgar, and Nathan stood beside her as an equal partner in all things. They never had children of their own, but the women who passed through the Whitmore house became their family, and Clara took pride in each one who found the courage to choose freedom. On quiet evenings, Clara would sometimes take out her mother's journal and read those final desperate entries. The pain never fully faded, but it transformed into something else. Fuel for the work she did, reminder of why it mattered, evidence that even in the darkest circumstances, resistance was possible. Her mother had fought with the only weapons available to her: hidden journals, secreted letters, jewelry tucked away for a daughter to find. She'd planted seeds of rebellion and watered them with her own suffering, trusting that Clara would be strong enough to see the harvest. And Clara had been. She'd taken those seeds and grown them into something larger than either of them could have imagined. A refuge, a community, a living testament to the power of choice and the strength of women who refuse to be broken. Sometimes, when storms rolled across the prairie, Clara would stand on her porch and remember that night. The rain, the lightning, the desperate flight to Nathan's door. She'd been running from death then, running toward an uncertain future with nothing but hope and stubborn will. Now she stood in that future, having claimed it with her own hands. The storms no longer frightened her. They reminded her of what she'd survived, what she'd overcome, how far she'd come. Nathan would join her on those nights, his hand finding hers without words. And they'd watch the lightning split the sky together. Two people who'd chosen each other freely, who'd built a life on their own terms, who knew the true value of freedom because they'd both fought to claim it. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, full of possibility and choice, and the wide-open future they'd earned through courage and sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to accept anything less than the lives they deserved. Clara had once been a girl running from a cage, terrified and alone. Now she was a woman who'd broken that cage apart and built something better from the pieces. A woman who helped other women do the same. A woman who lived by her own choices every single day. And when the storms passed and the stars emerged, bright and countless in the Nebraska sky, Clara would squeeze Nathan's hand and smile, because she'd learned the most important truth of all, that freedom, once claimed, once fought for, once truly owned, could never be taken away again. She was free, completely, absolutely, eternally free. And that freedom was the sweetest victory of all.